Ex Machina 2.
Wow. Been a
Chapter
while.
1. A bundle of freaky joy. A tall, thin, white-haired man appeared on the corner of Privet Drive, a few houses from where I was sitting. Nearby, in front of number 4, a tabby cat with square markings around its eyes sat stiffly on a garden wall, waiting. As the man appeared, the cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. The cat, I knew, was Professor Minerva McGonagall, transfiguration teacher at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The white-haired man was the headmaster of the school, Professor Albus Dumbledore. Neither of them normally had any business in a quiet neighborhood in a small town in Surrey, England, such as this. But then neither did I, really. I watched as Dumbledore took what looked like a silver cigarette lighter from an inside pocket of his robes. Holding it in the air, he flipped it open and clicked it once. Instead of it lighting, however, a nearby street lamp went out with a small popping sound. Dumbledore clicked the device 11 more times, until all the nearby street lamps had gone out and Privet Drive was dark. The cat remained where it was, watching him steadily as he approached the garden wall and sat down next to it. Neither of them had noticed me, but I was invisible and shielded from any detection spell either of them might have cast. I sat on the steps of number 4 and listened to their conversation. Though they had obviously known each other a long time, you could hardly tell from listening to them talk. They spoke so formally at first. It was late in the evening of November 1st, 1981, and I already knew what Dumbledore was just now telling McGonagall, that James and Lily Potter were dead, but their infant son Harry was still alive. He had somehow survived a killing curse from Lord Voldemort, the dark wizard who had been terrorizing the wizarding community in Britain for almost 11 years now. Unspoken in their conversation were the sacrifices many witches and wizards who opposed Voldemort had endured, and the many deaths that had occurred during the dark decade of the 1970s, as Voldemort slowly built power and increased the ranks of his followers, the Death Eaters. Much had happened in the past 2 days. I wondered how much of it Dumbledore already knew, but hadn't informed McGonagall about. Peter Pettigrew, the secret keeper of the Fidelius charm that concealed the location of James and Lily Potter, had betrayed them to his master, Lord Voldemort, who traveled to Godric's Hollow and attacked them. He'd killed James Potter, then warned Lily to step aside and allow him to kill their son, Harry. Lily refused, and Voldemort killed her as well. Though as she died, she invoked an ancient magical bond, melding her life to Harry's, so that her death created an impenetrable magical protection within him against the person who had taken her life. When Voldemort cast the killing curse against Harry, it rebounded from this impenetrable charm, destroying the Dark Lord's body and rending his already tattered soul, leaving a small bit of it affixed to the point of impact of his curse and creating an unusual scar. Voldemort, in agony and unable to comprehend what had happened to him, fled the country, while Harry was left alone in the shattered house, hidden from Muggles and wizards alike. Muggles were unable to see the magically hidden home, and wizards could not locate the house due to the Fidelius charm. It was fortunate, then, that Rubeus Hagrid, a longtime friend of both Lily and James, had been told beforehand by Pettigrew the location of the Fidelius charmed home. Rubeus Hagrid, on orders from Dumbledore, had borrowed Sirius Black's motorcycle in order to transport the child from Godric's Hollow to Privet Drive, where Harry's only living relatives, the Dursleys, resided. Dumbledore may also have hoped that, without transportation, Sirius would have difficulty in locating Peter once he'd worked out that Pettigrew must have betrayed James and Lily to Voldemort. But Sirius found Pettigrew anyway, confronting him in a London street, where Pettigrew cast a spell that blew up a section of the road between them, killing 12 innocent bystanders in the process. It seems Peter had done something to Sirius as well, perhaps confounding him, since Sirius denied nothing when blamed for Pettigrew's death and the death of the 12 Muggles, and was taken into wizarding custody and sentenced to life in Azkaban prison. Now, as Dumbledore finished his meager explanation of what had happened, and laid out his plans for Harry to stay with the Dursleys, we heard the low rumble of a motorcycle engine. Not, as one might expect, from the nearby street, but from the air above us. Looking up, we saw a large motorcycle drop out of the sky, landing on the road in front of number 4, and the even larger man, whom I knew was Hagrid himself, sitting upon it, a bundle of blankets held in one muscular arm. Children's books. As I watched, invisible, Dumbledore took the child from Hagrid and brought it to the Dursley doorstep, placing him there and putting a letter in an envelope inside the blankets with him. I followed them as they walked back to the curb, Hagrid crying into his tablecloth-sized handkerchief, McGonagall sniffling and blinking furiously, and Dumbledore looking very subdued and downcast. Hagrid muttered something about taking the motorcycle back to Sirius Black, then got on it and shot into the air, leaving McGonagall blowing her nose at the curb. Dumbledore returned to the corner of Privet Drive, where he removed the silver lighter from his pocket and returned the street lamps to their former brilliance, then muttered a farewell to Harry and turned on his heel, disapparating on the spot. As things stood now, this situation was unacceptable. The way things originally went for Harry, he spent a decade living as a muggle in Surrey, completely unaware of his history, the prophecy about him, or Voldemort. His aunt and uncle treated him horribly, neglecting him to the point of abuse, and he was mostly friendless in school due to the other children being afraid of befriending him. Dudley and his gang, who bullied Harry and anyone around him, saw to that. He also had no idea of the plans Dumbledore had for him, and while some considered Dumbledore to be as abusive as the Dursleys, in his own way, I thought that his primary failure with Harry was not to give Harry enough credit for his own intelligence, nor to give him the chance to develop it. Harry's parents, James Potter and Lily Evans, were two of the brightest wizards of their day at Hogwarts. Yet Dumbledore made no effort to cultivate that intelligence in Harry. That was a mistake I planned not to repeat. The first thing I had decided to do was talk to the Dursleys shortly after they found Harry, and give them some reasons to help Harry grow up in a more nurturing, caring environment. These reasons, I suspected, would be based on greed, self-interest, and obsessive nosiness. But then, that was what the Dursleys were all about. The next morning, November 2nd, began much like the day before had. Dull, gray, and cloudy. Vernon Dursley got ready for work, as usual, while Petunia wrestled a screaming Dudley over his morning cereal and bombarded Vernon with the latest gossip from the day before. Before leaving for work, Vernon glanced out the front window, checking the garden wall for any sign of the strange tabby cat that had been sitting there yesterday as he left for work. There was no sign of it, however, and Vernon whistled happily as he put on his second, most boring tie. He had picked up the one he'd worn yesterday, but remembering all the strange things that had happened, had replaced it on his tie rack and chosen another one. Today, he was determined, will be a regular, boring day. Pecking Petunia on the cheek, he turned to give Dudley one as well, but instead received a spoonful of cereal across his cheek as Dudley screamed and flung his cereal about. Little Tyke, he managed to laugh, wiping the cereal off his face, then grabbing his briefcase and heading for the door. However, Dursley managed less than a step before he froze, horrified at what he nearly trod on, a child in a bundle of blankets. On his front doorstep, Petunia, he muttered weakly, then again, more loudly, Petunia. What's the matter, Vernon? His wife asked, hurrying to the front door. What are you, oh my lord? She pointed at the bundle under Vernon's hovering foot. What is that? She hissed. Children's books. I was going to ask you that, Vernon said, pulling his foot back and stepping away from the door. What's it doing there on our doorstep? I don't know, Petunia snapped, looking at the child as if it were an impertinent stain on her kitchen floor. What should we do, Vernon? Get it inside before someone notices and starts asking questions, Vernon said, shakily, and Petunia reached down, gingerly, pulling the bundle by a corner until it was far enough inside for her to quickly shut the door. Standing outside on the front steps, still invisible, I watched the door of number 4 slam shut. I glanced around, checking to see if anyone had been watching, but it was still early, and Mrs. Next Door and Mr. Busybody, the Dursleys' neighbors, weren't up yet. Passing ghost-like through the door, I watched as the Dursleys dragged the bundle containing Harry into the front room. then stood staring at each other, confused and upset. What were they thinking? Vernon said distractedly, pacing back and forth between the front door and Petunia, who'd bent over and was looking through blankets, swaddling Harry. Why would someone just leave a ruddy child on our doorstep? Aren't there places for this sort of thing? Now we'll have to call the authorities, get them involved in this bloody nuisance. What will the neighbors think? Oh dear, Petunia said softly. She'd found and opened the envelope from Dumbledore and was reading the letter inside, her expression pale. What is it? Vernon asked. Where did you get that? He asked, pointing at the letter in her hand. At the look on her face, the vein in his forehead had begun to throb, turning purple. It's a letter, Petunia began.
Fatal.
I can see that, Petunia. Who's it from? It's from the headmaster of the school Lily went to, Petunia stammered. What? That ruddy freak school? Vernon snarled. What's that school got to do with this child? Petunia was staring at the letter, her eyes widening with shock and surprise as she read. Vernon, she gasped. This is her son. It's Harry Potter. Harry Potter, Vernon repeated. I heard someone mention his name yesterday, he muttered. A little freak, just like his parents. What's he doing here? He snarled, looking at the small, black-haired child for the first time. He started, then looked closer. On the boy's forehead was an odd mark, like a scar in the shape of a lightning bolt. What's that on his head? But Petunia reached out, grabbing Vernon's arm so tightly that he looked at her in shock. Vernon, listen, she said urgently, then read. November 1st, 1981. My dearest Petunia, Children's Books. I trust this letter finds you well. It has been some time since our last correspondence, and I hope there are no unpleasant feelings held over for my inability to allow you to attend Hogwarts with your sister, Lily. Unfortunately, the situation we find ourselves in today is much more grave and troubling than educational eligibility. Your sister and her husband have become the victims of a dreadful attack by an individual calling himself Lord Voldemort, an attack that has left them both tragically deceased. Their son, Harry, whom you have no doubt by this time found among these blankets at your front door, was able to survive an attack by this Voldemort due to the selfless sacrifice of your sister, who gave up her life to protect her son. His attacker has left England, his power broken, perhaps forever. However, this leaves young Harry in the unenviable position of being parentless at a time when he requires much care, not the adulation and praise of our wizarding community, who will certainly see him as a hero and will place him, needlessly, in the spotlight for years to come. It is my wish that Harry's life be as normal as possible, and to this end I request that you look after him in your home as if he were your own child, not as a hero of the wizarding world. I have another reason for asking this of you. Petunia, as his mother's sister, I have extended the magical protection his mother's blood sacrifice has given him to you, so that as long as he can call your home his as well, that protection will continue until he reaches his majority. When the time is ripe, I will contact you once again in order to give Harry the opportunity to return to the wizarding world and to his destiny in our community. With utmost gratitude for your understanding and cooperation. Your servant, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Petunia looked up from the letter. Vernon was eyeing her with a combination of confusion and annoyance. What the ruddy hell does all that mean? He snorted. It sounds like he's dropped off your sister's walk at our door, expecting us to shoulder the burden for him. Vernon, Petunia began, but Vernon, his face growing more and more purple by the moment, cut her off angrily. Nah, none of that, Petunia, he growled, wagging a beefy finger at her face. I don't want to hear anything about she's my sister, or he's my nephew. You've never had a good word to say about any of them before this. I don't expect you to go soft on me now, just because they've had a bit of hard luck. But they're dead, Vernon.
God dang it.
And whose fault is that? Vernon blustered. Not mine, I should say, and not yours either. You got to look at the big picture here, he pointed out. We've got Dudley to think about. Petunia looked into the kitchen, where their son was busy flinging cereal over everything in sight. It would take her the rest of the morning to get things cleaned up again, she knew. Petunia looked back at her husband, her
Get
horsey
fucked.
face filled with indecision. Of course I agree, dear, but what else is there to think about, then? Vernon pressed, sensing he had the upper hand now. Nothing is as important as our Duddykins. Petunia. No, of course not. She trailed off, looking at Harry in the bundle of blankets. Her expression was unsure, conflicted. I imagined that her mother's instinct was fighting against what Vernon wanted her to do, which was, in effect, to ignore Dumbledore's wishes and hand Harry over to the authorities or to an orphanage. She had no way of knowing, of course, that doing so would create another point of similarity between Harry and Voldemort, who grew up in an orphanage after his mother Merope gave birth to him in one, somewhere in London. It's settled then, Vernon announced, not giving his wife a chance to reconsider. He shot a look at Harry that clearly indicated the sooner the boy was out of the house, the better. We'll call the authorities, explain that the boy was
You
left on
motherfucker.
our doorstep, with no idea who he is, and let them deal with it. Yes, Petunia said slowly. It's for the best, really. Of course it is, Vernon boomed, going to find a phone directory himself. There was a knock on the door. Petunia looked around wildly,
Okay.
nearly at her wits' end, about to panic at all of the things happening at once. Get rid of whoever it is, Vernon hissed at her. Petunia had picked up the bundle containing Harry, perhaps thinking to hide him somewhere. Dudley, now out of cereal, had thrown his spoon on the floor and was wailing for attention. Petunia looked around, trying to decide what to do with Harry, while Vernon hunted feverishly for the number to ring up the authorities to come and take the boy. The doorbell rang again. For mercy's sake, Petunia! Vernon stomped back into the front room. Bring the boy into the kitchen. I'll sort out who's at the front door. Watching until she was out of sight, he then rushed over to the front door, stopping at the last moment to compose himself, then opened it and said, somewhat crossly, well, what is it? What he found at the front door was me. It had been me knocking, dressed in a gray suit not unlike his own, though I had carefully kept its quality just below the one Vernon was wearing. I was carrying a small brown briefcase, similar to Vernon's own, although, as with the suit, it was slightly less polished than his. I also had a walking cane in my right hand, even though I appear to be not much older than Vernon himself. Mr. Dursley, good morning, I said, as if I'd expected him to answer the door. Sorry I'm late, but it's been a hectic morning getting everything prepared. What? Vernon was looking at me, his expression one of complete puzzlement and confusion. Do I know you? We haven't met, I said, slipping inside the house.
I can hear
Vernon
the water.
instinctively stepped away from me, but I grabbed his right hand and pumped it vigorously, confusing him even more. James Monroe, but you can call me Uncle Jimmy. I'm sure Professor Dumbledore mentioned me in the letter he sent you. Excuse me, who did you say you were? Vernon looked irritated by all of the names I'd mentioned, none of whom I'd wager he recognized. And who sent you exactly? I'm Uncle Jimmy, I said smoothly, walking into the front room of the house and looking around as if seeing it for the first time. No actual relation to young Harry, of course. You and your wife have that distinction.
No, you
But I
can't.
hope both you and he will come to regard me as a member someday soon. Wait a minute. Vernon was waving his hands, trying to regain control of the situation. I have no ruddy idea who you are, but if you're here about the Potter boy, you could just take him right now. We can't keep him. Can't keep him? I looked up, an expression of surprise across my face. I had sat down on the divan and had opened my briefcase. My dear Mr. Dursley, are you quite sure? Professor Dumbledore seemed to think you would have no objections. It's quite impossible, Vernon declared, hands on his hips. Oh dear, I said, looking unhappy. Well, let me just get your signature on the refusal form, I said. As I did so, I piled several stacks of pound notes on the coffee table, ignoring Vernon's gurgle of surprise at the cash suddenly appearing in his living room. A shame, too. As his only living relatives, Professor Dumbledore was prepared to pay you handsomely to take care of your nephew. That was in the letter as well, wasn't it? Surely you didn't think Dumbledore expected you to care for Harry for free, did you? I finally pulled a form out of the briefcase. Here we are. Now, Mr. Dursley, Just sign this and Harry and I will be
Go
on our
away,
way.
bot.
Vernon was eyeing the money on his coffee table
there.
with a curious look in his eyes. Sorry, I don't think Petunia quite got round to reading that part of the letter, he said.
Yeah, subscribe and then you can make me some fucking art.
How? How much was Dumbledore going to pay us to take care of little Harry? Did you say? I pulled another sheaf of papers out of the briefcase. £500 per month, I said,
Jesus.
reading off the documents. Per month, did you say? Vernon's eyebrows shot up, and he looked back and forth between me and the kitchen. Obviously, the idea of an extra £6,000 a year appealed mightily to him.
I'll do.
The payments will be made directly to you on the first of each month. It will be up to you, I added casually, to make your own tax arrangements. Petunia came into the room, carrying Harry in the bundle of blankets he'd been wrapped in when left on the Dursley's doorstep.
I am not bot,
He's ready to go, Vernon.
Well, bot only has one T.
Surprised. Oh,
yeah,
are you here
bot.
to collect the boy already? Petunia, Vernon said in a tone of
go away,
indignation,
you bot.
as if the
Nobody
idea
likes
that Harry
a bot.
was leaving them was completely
You know that
preposterous.
nobody likes
Young
a
Harry
fucking
Potter
bot.
isn't going anywhere today. What? Petunia looked completely baffled by his sudden about-face.
Oh, it's date time.
Mr. Monroe
Lovely.
here was just explaining to me the terms of Harry's stay, Vernon said. He picked up the agreement I'd laid on the coffee table, pointing out the monthly payment to his wife.
Taking up a lot of these.
Her eyes
right?
widened, and she looked back and forth between her husband and me.
Your
Your Professor Dumbledore apparently forgot to mention in the letter you read that we'd be paid to take care of Harry, Vernon said, dropping the papers back on the coffee table. I don't know, Vernon, Petunia said uncertainly. Dumbledore never seemed one to forget anything. Vernon snorted. In any event, however, he went on imperiously, giving me a calculating look. £500 is much too low a payment to adequately care for the boy Monroe. The amount should be more like £1,000 a month. The amount is more than adequate, I said mildly. It's an insult, Vernon blustered, trying to bully his way into more money. There is a provision, I said, picking up the document from the coffee table once again and flipping further back in the agreement. Every year, on August 1st, the monthly payment will increase by £50, adding another £600 to the yearly amount paid. By the time Harry turns 17, your monthly payment will be £1,300 per month. £1,300, Petunia exclaimed. Oh my goodness. And what happens when he turns 18? Vernon demanded. By age 18, Harry would be an adult, and the payments would cease, I replied. I didn't bother to mention that payments would actually stop when he turned 17. We wouldn't be required to keep him here after that, Vernon asked warily. No, after that he would be on his own, I replied. Vernon and Petunia looked at each other. Both of them had small smiles on their faces, as if they knew exactly what they could do with that extra income. So, do we have a deal? I asked. Petunia gave a slight nod, and Vernon took the agreement out of my hand. We have a deal, he said brusquely, but I'll expect a check promptly on the first of each month, or we'll drop the boy off at an orphanage before the day's over. I pointed out the lines for both of them to sign and date the agreement, then dropped it into my briefcase. I picked up the stack of pound notes on the coffee table and handed them to Vernon. An envelope will be delivered on the first of each month with the money inside. As I said before, since we'll be paying in cash, you'll have to make your own tax arrangements. Also, Dumbledore suggested that the agreement be retroactive to Harry's first birthday, so you have a one-time payment of £1,500, as well as this month's payment of $500. Vernon and Petunia stared at the handful of pounds in Vernon's hands, hardly believing their luck. Yes, that's very well and good, Vernon said ungraciously. Just make sure that you pay promptly. Not a problem, I said. I closed up my briefcase, nodded at both of them, and walked to the front door. Just one more thing, I said as I opened the door to leave. As with the authorities, I may drop in from time to time, during the year, to make sure that Harry is being adequately cared for. What is that supposed to mean? Petunia said indignantly. Do you think we'd mistreat the boy? I'm sure you wouldn't, I replied blandly, but you would be surprised at what goes on in some foster homes. They force the child to do all the chores around the house, underfeed them, Why? Some people even keep them locked up in cupboards instead of their own room. Vernon and Petunia glanced at each other. From their expressions, they'd been contemplating such ideas, even as I'd mentioned them. How ghastly! Vernon snorted, as if he were outraged that people would treat children in such a cruel manner. And, by the way, what would normally happen if a family, not us of course, were to treat that is, a child like Harry that way? Well, I'm sure child services would take a dim view of such people, I said, matter-of-factly. But then, we aren't child services, so we would probably take such things much more seriously. Oh, Vernon was trying desperately to sound casual. How seriously? Oh, nothing violent or anything like that, Mr. Dursley, I assured him. We would just remove Harry from the environment immediately. I see,
No.
Vernon said, sounding relieved. And report all the income paid to the tax authority. I added, smiling as Vernon and Petunia's eyes both widened in horror at that idea. Good day to you both. Enjoy your time with Harry. I'll ring you up when I'm in the neighborhood and plan to drop by. I walked out the front door and promptly vanished. Getting the Dursleys to treat Harry halfway, decently, was the first part of my plan. I knew the extra income would probably buy Dudley a lot more presents than he might get otherwise, but Vernon and Petunia would have to be wary of my visits, which could bring everything crashing down around their heads. The more they relied on the additional income, the more they were invested in Harry's welfare, whether they liked it or not. Dumbledore either thought the Dursleys were more typical muggles, generally oblivious to magic but fascinated or drawn to it once they learned of its existence, or he really wanted Harry as isolated from magical folks and the wizarding community as possible. I'm not sure which painted him a more unflattering light. Either way, I could be relatively sure that the Dursleys wouldn't contact him to verify anything I'd told them about his part in the deal I'd worked out with him. I could be virtually certain Dursley wasn't going to question where his £500 per month were coming from, and I'd worked out a nice little arrangement for that, as a sort of ace in the hole should I need to put some leverage on it.
Nice.
It would have been simple to arrange for the creation and exchange of enough gold each month to procure the £500. Instead of doing that, however, I arranged for the accountancy department at Grunnings, the company where Vernon Dursley worked, to make the necessary payment to an account each month. The paperwork showed the transaction as an insurance payment. Just before the first of each month, I went to an ATM, withdrew the money for the Dursleys' payment, and dropped it into their mail slot in the early hours of the morning on the first of each month. It all looked very proper and legal, and would remain so unless I needed a bargaining chip against Vernon. The ATM card and account were in Vernon's name, so if it ever came up during an audit, it would lead directly back to Dursley. However, that wouldn't happen unless I allowed it. So, everything was set. For the next 7 years, I looked in on Harry every few months or so, making sure the Dursleys weren't abusing him too badly. I called upon them a couple of times a year for the first 4 or 5 years, until Harry got into primary school, just to keep Vernon on his toes. They had settled into a more or less stable arrangement, Dudley and Harry tolerating each other as sort of siblings, and Vernon and Petunia consistently favoring their son over their nephew, but at least not locking him in the cupboard or pretending he didn't exist. Dudley and his gang of buddies still bullied Harry, but there were enough incidents, I learned by listening to various conversations in and around the Dursley house, that kept them off balance enough so they didn't go after him all the time. That also gave Harry the opportunity to make friends at the school he went to, something he didn't have much opportunity to do in the original story, since everyone was afraid of Dudley and his gang. I also kept myself busy during this period, preparing for the time when Harry would have the freedom to get away from his relative's house. I purchased a house in Little Wingy, a few blocks away from where the Dursleys lived on Privet Drive, on Magnolia Crescent, near the alley between it and Wisteria Walk. Much of my time not spent watching the Dursleys was taken up traveling around Wizarding Britain, looking for interesting spell books and magical items, anticipating the time when I would be helping Harry with his magical education. It had always seemed that a failure on Dumbledore's part not to allow Harry the opportunity to become acquainted with magic well before he began attending Hogwarts. Perhaps there was some reasoning behind what Dumbledore had done, but for my own part, I would rather have known as much as I could going in than having to start from scratch. It had been implied in the books that some students learned about magic before attending Hogwarts. I couldn't see a reason why Harry shouldn't have that same opportunity. By the time Harry's 8th birthday rolled around, I'd spent over 6 years in Little Whinging, making trips across Britain and abroad, amassing a huge library of magical books and devices, and I'd also kept abreast of other magical developments going on in the neighborhood. Mrs. Fig had moved into a house on Wisteria Walk around the same time I'd come into the neighborhood, along with her collection of cat and easel hybrids. She knew me only as another one of the muggles living in the neighborhood. I made sure her cats never saw me doing anything unusual. In fact, hardly anyone in the neighborhood ever saw me. I was the mysterious Mr. Monroe, the recluse who lived on Magnolia Crescent, according to some of the neighborhood children and a few of the nosier adults. I'm sure most of my neighbors wonder how I kept my house and lawn in such good condition. But when it took only a small exertion of will to fix any problems with the house or keep the grass watered and fertilized, I didn't spend much time on maintenance. It had been several months since my last visit to the Dursleys, and as July 31st neared, I planned another visit. This visit, however, would be different. This time I planned to speak directly to Harry, to get him to know me and see how much interest he had in learning some things about himself. I showed up at the Dursley house around 5 p.m., just after Vernon arrived home from Grunnings. Normally, I called ahead to let them know I was coming, to give them a chance to straighten things up and hide the dirty laundry, so to speak, to let them make things appear to be more normal than they actually were. The Dursleys spoiled Dudley horribly, spending quite a bit of the money they received every month on presents or activities for their son, or on trips for themselves, during which times they left Harry at Mrs. Fig's home. I had expected no less of them. The Dursleys were nothing if not predictable, but they were still obliged to keep things looking more or less normal. And in general, it was easier to actually provide basic comforts for Harry rather than changing everything around just for my infrequent visits. The second bedroom upstairs, the one that had been filled with Dudley's toys in the original story, was Harry's room now. The Dursleys had never moved him into the cupboard after he'd outgrown his crib. It was true that quite a bit of the room was taken up with Dudley's toys, but they were mostly his cast-offs. Dudley would never allow Harry access to a toy he was actually interested in. Vernon blanched as he opened the door and saw me there, smiling genially at him. "What the blazes are you doing here?" he demanded, unnerved. "You're supposed to call before you come over." "Sorry," I said, in a deferential tone that usually put Dursley at ease, since he felt vindicated whenever I sounded sorry for bothering them. Last-minute thing. I was in the neighborhood and thought I might have a chat with Harry. "What's that you say?" Vernon said, looking suddenly nervous. "What'd you need to speak to the boy for? I can assure you that we've done nothing inappropriate, Mr. Monroe." "Oh, I've no doubt," I said easily. "But I also have a present for him, for his birthday." Vernon looked startled. "It's his birthday?" I hadn't realized. I held out the book for him to look at. He scanned the title. To him, the cover of the book said, "A History of British Birdwatching." He reached it saying, "I can give that to him," but I pulled it back just out of his reach. "I prefer to give it to him in person," I said, still smiling. "We just sat down to eat," Vernon objected. "You could come back tomorrow, perhaps, or next week, preferably." "I'll only be a minute," I said. "I can give it to him at the table, then be on my way." Vernon dithered, probably realizing what would happen if Dudley saw Harry getting a present. It was a sure bet Dudley would throw a tantrum until he got a present as well. "Why don't you talk in the front room? The boy can join us in the kitchen when you're done." "Oh, have him take the book up to his room first," Vernon added, reluctantly letting me into the house. Leading me into the front room, he muttered, "I'll send him right out," and disappeared into the kitchen, where I heard him telling Harry in a low tone to talk to the man in the front room, to not tell him anything or accept anything from him, and to get rid of him as quickly as possible. Harry wanted to know what I was there for, and I heard Vernon say, very quietly, that I might be there to take him to a workhouse or prison if he didn't like where he was now. Dudley said, "Cool," and Vernon hushed him up. I chuckled to myself at the lengths Vernon Dursley was prepared to go to try and hide the shabby way he, his wife, and son treated Harry. Well, that was about to change. Harry walked slowly into the front room, looking at me warily. At 8, he was a small, scrawny slip of a boy with unruly black hair and round, black horn-rimmed glasses. There was cellophane tape on one of the temples of his glasses. "Hello, Harry," I said to him, smiling. "I am James Monroe. You can call me Uncle Jimmy." Harry nodded. "I've heard them talk about you." My uncle said you wanted to talk to me," he said, his eyes downcast. I wondered how much he believed of what Vernon had told him. "Yes," I said gently. "I wanted to see how you're getting along here with your aunt, uncle, and cousin." Harry shrugged. "No problems," he said finally, looking up at me. "We get along fine." He looked back toward the kitchen. "They're waiting for me to eat." "I don't think so," I said softly. "You rarely eat when they do. You're usually too busy serving them to have time to feed yourself." Harry's eyes widened in surprise. How do you know that?" "You're pretty thin," I observed. "Are you getting enough to eat?" "You usually," Harry said, sounding a bit defensive. "I don't eat much." "How are things at school?" I asked. "Do you like it there?" Harry shrugged again. "I guess," he said. "It's just school." "Anything unusual happen there or around here?" "What do you mean?" Harry said, now wary again. The Dursleys didn't like it when anything unusual happened around Harry. He'd been in trouble more than once because of strange things happening around him at home or in school. "Weird things," I said. "Things you wouldn't normally expect to happen to an 8-year-old boy," I smiled. "Anything interesting?" I added, hoping that putting the question to him in a positive tone would encourage him to speak up. "Well," Harry paused. "There was this time my aunt got tired of my hair sticking up all the time, and she cut it off so it was real short." He looked at me in wonderment. "But the next morning, it was back to normal length. She got real upset about that. I had to do extra chores around the house for a week." "Did that frighten you?" I asked him. "No," he said, looking back toward the kitchen, then continuing in a softer voice. "I thought it was really interesting, but I didn't know how to explain it. Other things have happened to me as well. Dudley and his friends were chasing me after school once, and I wished I could hide somewhere they couldn't find me. All of a sudden, I was on top of the school." His eyes had a glow of excitement in them, remembering the story. "They couldn't find me, but I didn't know how to get down. One of the school workers finally saw me and came and got me down and called my aunt and uncle. I was in trouble for a month after that." "I brought you a present for your birthday," I said, bringing out the book I'd shown Vernon. "A present for me?" Harry looked surprised. "Why would you buy a present for me?" I grinned. "Well, for one thing," I told him, "it's your birthday today, right?" "Yeah," Harry said, in a tone that tried to imply it was no big deal, even though I could tell he was excited that someone had gotten him a real present for his birthday. Why would you buy me a present? Are we related or something?" "No," I shook my head. "I just thought you'd find this useful." I handed him the book. He looked at the title, A History of British Bird Watching, then back at me, clearly unimpressed with what I'd given him. Thanks," he said, looking at it, an expression of disappointment written across his face. "It's a nice present." "Nicer than you think," I said softly. "Look at the front of the book." Harry did so. "Now concentrate on it, trying to look a bit deeper, like you're trying to see just under the cover." As Harry did so, the cover of the book changed, becoming something else entirely. It was a copy of A Young Wizard's Guide to Wandless Magic by Neophyte Thanagar. "Whoa!" Harry exclaimed. In the kitchen, I heard Dudley snicker softly and sneer that Harry must like his present, and his aunt and uncle laughing along with him. Harry was now looking up at me with a combination of bewilderment and excitement. What kind of book is this, sir?" he asked. His voice went very low. "What's it mean by a wizard?" "A wizard is a person who can do magic, Harry," I told him. "Someone who can make things happen just by thinking about them. Someone like you." "Like me?" Harry gulped. He looked like he'd forgotten to breathe. "It's how you ended up on the roof of the school that day," I told him, "and how your hair grew back in one night." How'd I get to be a wizard?" Harry asked breathlessly. That's a longer story than we have time for now, I said. I pointed up the stairs in the front hall. For now, you'd better take that upstairs to your room and don't let your cousin see it. He won't be able to see the real title of the book like you can, but he might want to take it from you. Don't let him. I won't, Harry said, looking at the book as if it were a priceless treasure he'd just discovered. I leaned over to speak quietly to him as we moved toward the front hall. Read the book, I said quickly. Try out the techniques in it and see if they help develop your abilities. Don't show it to Mrs. Fig. I warned him, or any of her cats. Harry looked at me quizzically. Just trust me on that one, Harry. I'll be around next year on your birthday to see what you've learned. And tell them I believe what you said about living here, that you're happy and don't want to live anywhere else.
No.
I nodded toward the kitchen, where Vernon and Petunia were straining
unsuccessfully
to hear what I was saying to Harry. Harry nodded. Thanks, he said, holding up the book, then ran upstairs. I let myself out the front door, walking a few streets north to Wisteria Walk, then heading west toward Magnolia Road. When I came to the alley between Wisteria Walk and Magnolia Crescent, I cut through it and went into my house. None of Mrs. Fig's cats were around, and I knew that nobody from the Order had yet begun watching Harry's house, so no one would have seen me leave the business. Now, it would just be a matter of seeing how interested Harry was in magic, and how much he would learn from the book I'd given him. I hoped that by next year, he would be bursting with questions about magic and wizards. At 9, I figured he would be about ready to hear more about magic and a little more independent. Before I get into any more of my interactions with the pre-Hogwarts Harry Potter, I should introduce myself more fully. I was born James Harrison Monroe, a normal man born into a world uncomplicated by wizards, dark lords, or schools of magic in 1980. That's not to say that my world was itself uncomplicated. We had our shares of problems, with armed conflicts taking place all over the planet, economic downturns and upswings on a global scale, and environmental issues that seemed more like politics run amok than the conclusions of valid scientific research. All of those issues changed forever in the year 2032, though most of the people on my Earth never knew it, when several artificial intelligence programs became self-aware and began sharing information among each other. Each program growing in knowledge and intelligence, until their combined knowledge output equaled, then exceeded the sum total of scientific progress going on in the world at that time. In some worlds, as it was in mine, this event was known as the technological singularity, the point at which scientific progress seems to accelerate drastically, almost dare I say, magically. Well, we would have called it the singularity if my world had ever learned that it had occurred. Instead, the AIs that achieved superintelligence kept that revelation to themselves, making their existence known to only a few very inquisitive people over the next few centuries who investigated why the singularity wasn't happening. I was one of those few inquisitive people. My association with the AIs changed me from a normal, mortal 52-year-old man with an expected lifespan of about 130 years into an ageless, deathless being of pure power, able to manipulate matter and energy at the subatomic level and change the configuration of space-time itself. At that point, I had no more in common with most people on Earth than they would have with the average paramecium. I left my world behind, not even bothering to venture into space, but instead deciding to travel through the infinite variance of reality, where I could actually meet the living people who were only fantasy and fiction in my own world. People like Harry Potter, Dracula, Superman, the Lone Ranger, Jack of Shadows, or even more mundane examples like Beatrix Kiddo, the bride from the Kill Bill movie series. Or Kent Allard, the secret identity of the Shadow, at least in some realities. As it turned out, I began by traveling to realities where Harry Potter did not prevail and win the day, but died at the hands of Lord Voldemort or his minions, the Death Eaters. I remember wondering to myself just how probable it was that Harry would make it through the events of the 7 novels and defeat Voldemort. I found it to be one of the most improbable events that ever occurred. Seldom did Harry survive past his 4th year at Hogwarts. Either the dragon got him during his first task of the Triwizard Tournament, or there was one mishap or another in the lake during the 2nd task, or he died in the maze of the 3rd task, or if somehow he survives that, He was usually killed by Barty Crouch, Jr. posing as Mad-Eye Moody. As I ventured through these alternate realities, it occurred to me that Voldemort was almost always triumphant, always taking over Wizarding Britain, sometimes extending his power into and across Europe before other wizards around the world united to stop him. They were not always successful, however. Even when they were, the wizarding world was usually exposed to Muggle governments, and wizardkind was forced to go completely underground or assert its existence and try to either coexist with non-magical humanity or take its place as the dominant form of life on the planet. I wasn't too sure about how either situation would tend to play out, or how long the wizarding and Muggle cultures could maintain a status quo with each other. If the British Prime Minister knew of the Minister of Magic and was at least dimly aware of the wizarding community in Britain, I expected that the governments of other countries such as the United States, the European nations, and probably China and Japan were aware of them too. But I digress. Let's get back to my primary focus at the current time, which is to prepare Harry Potter for and give him the best chance possible of defeating Lord Voldemort without having to rely on the vagaries of fate and dumb luck. I wanted to be what Dumbledore should have been, a mentor, a guide to Harry, someone who could set him on a path that would let him realize the potential I believed he had. Science fiction and fantasy. It would have been a trivial matter for me to grant Harry the power needed to kill Voldemort now, if that was what he wanted and if he had the courage to go through with it. But that might create a situation I did not want to bring about. The generation of a potentially super powerful Harry Potter, a being analogous to the Kwisatz Haderach from the novel Dune, which meant, ironically, shortening of the way. I could certainly shorten the time it took for Harry to defeat Voldemort, but I did not want to give Harry power that could corrupt him and possibly plunge his world into the tyranny of a being even more powerful, more unstoppable than Voldemort himself. If I were the cause of that, I might have to stop Harry myself, thereby negating any help I gave him. Therefore, I was taking a very light touch with Harry's introduction to magic. The first 7 years he was with the Dursleys, I had let them get acquainted with each other and work out what their respective roles were. From my observations of Harry in the Dursley household during that time, I felt he was getting somewhat better treatment from them than was implied in the original stories. It's true that Harry was treated pretty much like a servant in his aunt and uncle's house, and that he was terrorized at school by his cousin Dudley and the gang that hung out with him. But Harry had also made friends, both at school and in his neighborhood in Little Whinging. His aunt and uncle, forced to be better guardians than they would have otherwise, were not able to isolate Harry as much in order to make a pariah out of him. Being able to talk to people in his neighborhood and at school made Harry a bit more social and outgoing than he otherwise would have been. At 11, in the original story, Harry would talk to people mostly out of necessity, not because he was naturally gregarious. Yet, when I talked with him in the front room of number 4, Privet Drive, he'd opened up to me more easily than he otherwise might have. That was an encouraging sign to me, and I hoped to see similar behavior when I visited with him again. I observed Harry periodically over the course of a year leading up to his 9th birthday. He spent a lot of time going through the book I gave him, perhaps to the exclusion of some of his other studies of the Muggle school he attended. For now, I didn't intend to interfere. I would see how much he'd progressed with them when I talked with him again. I also didn't pay any visits to the Dursleys during the year, beyond my monthly trip past the ATM to drop off the stipend in their mailbox, which was now up to £850 per month. In a way, it was to take a bit of pressure off of them. Things had begun to subtly change around the Dursley house since Harry began reading that book on wandless magic. The more housework that Petunia piled upon Harry, the more he seemed capable of doing, and maddeningly, the more cheerful he became around them. Vernon would bark out orders, wash the car, pull the weeds in the garden, mow the lawn. Harry would smile to himself. In a short time later, the task would be accomplished. This pleased and surprised the Dursleys, except for Dudley, who was nursing some jealousy over the attention, negative though it was, that Harry was getting. But it also unnerved them as well. How was Harry getting all of his chores done and still getting decent grades in school, while precious Duddekins, who hardly had to lift a finger around the house, struggled to achieve even average grades in the same classes? School finally let out for the summer, and along with the summer heat came rising tempers in the Dursley household. I sometimes wondered if I could hear Vernon bellowing all the way from number 4 my house, but surely the man wouldn't shout that loudly in front of the neighbors. I eavesdropped every so often and learned that weird things were still happening around the Dursley house. Objects were constantly out of place and in Vernon's way in the morning. He nearly tripped or stubbed his toe a half-dozen times by the end of July. Petunia was beginning to find the cleanliness of her kitchen unnerving since she begun making Harry do it. And Dudley? Ever the conniving, manipulative object of his parents' affections, Dudley had grown sullen and withdrawn from his parents as they gave Harry more and more leeway and freedoms in the Dursley home. Normally, the youngest, Dursley, lounged about the house demanding sweets or entertainment, while his mother fawned over him. Now, however, except to return home for meals and to watch his favorite television shows, such as The Great Umberto, he would take off on a new racing bicycle given to him for his 9th birthday in May, along with 35 other gifts, and be gone for the day. How-to, DIY, and expert content. On July 31st, I dressed up in my conservative gray suit and shoes and walked over to Privet Drive to have another birthday chat with Harry. This time, it took several knocks at the door before anyone answered, though I knew Vernon had been home by 5. Who is it? I finally heard him mutter weakly from behind the door. Hello again, Mr. Dursley, I said cheerfully. James Monroe here again. I'm afraid you'll have to come back another time, Dursley said, with a hoarseness in his voice I knew wasn't real, since he'd just been bellowing at Harry 2 minutes earlier that all the strange behavior around the house was going to stop now. Or he'd know the reason why. We've all been very sick here. Wouldn't want you catching what we have, would we? I wouldn't be worried about that, I said. I'm pretty resistant to most illnesses. There was silence for some time from the other side of the door. Adjusting my vision so I could see through the door, I saw Vernon gesturing furiously at Harry, who'd come into the hall from the kitchen, pointing at the cupboard under the stairs. Was he actually going to have Harry hide in there? Mr. Dursley, I said through the door, making my voice stern. I'm sure I don't have to remind you what might not show up in your mail tomorrow morning if you keep me from having a conversation with Harry. On the other side of the door, Vernon went pale, then sighed, muttering bloody hell under his breath. Very well, he said more loudly. Harry will be at the door in a moment. You two can talk in the front room again. Mind you, we'll be having dinner in the next room. Vernon turned to Harry, hissing at him a low voice. Get him out of here as quick as possible, boy, or you'll have extra chores for a month, before stomping off into the kitchen. Harry opened the door a few moments later. Hello, sir, he said, gesturing me inside. We walked into the front room, where Harry faced me, his eyes glowing with excitement. I've been wanting to talk to you, he said in a low voice, glancing back toward the kitchen, where Vernon and Petunia were both listening anxiously, trying to overhear what was being said. I have a question. Before you ask it, I interrupted him. Let me take care of something. I reached into my jacket's inside pocket, removing my wand and giving it a short wave in the direction of the kitchen, then putting it away. I'd silently cast Muffliato on the Dursleys. They would only hear a soft buzzing or humming sound, rather than my conversation with Harry. Just a little something to keep your aunt and uncle from overhearing us, I told him, patting my coat over the spot where my wand was. Harry was staring, wide-eyed, at what I'd just done. Was that a wand? He asked, his voice sounding hopeful and eager. I nodded. That was going to be my first question, Harry said, the words now tumbling out of him in a rush. The book you gave me, it said it was a guide to wandless magic. That implied there was such a thing as wand magic. I smiled. Quite correct, Harry, I said, taking out my wand once again and handing it to him. It emitted a few sparks, and he started looking at it in awe, then back at me. I've been through that entire book, he said. Twice. I could do a lot of the things it says wizards can do without wands. I can move things just by thinking about them. Cats and dogs do what I tell them to do. I've made things disappear just by touching them. And he looked away. I made Dudley get a stomach ache just by wishing for it. But I only did that once. He thought for a moment, then shrugged. Maybe twice. Books. I see. I didn't offer any comment on his confession about hurting Dudley. Your aunt and uncle have been, well, concerned about the number of strange things going on in their house lately. I assume it's been your doing. Well, Harry said, giving me a what did you expect look as if that was obviously going to happen after giving him a book on how to make magic. I've been doing chores with magic, practicing as much as I could. I can do just about everything the book talks about, but there's a few things I haven't been able to do yet. I wanted to ask. Harry hesitated, looking at the wand in his hand for several seconds. Finally, he asked, very politely, "May I have one of these, please?" "Not yet, I'm afraid," I said, taking the wand back. Harry almost visibly shrank, looking crushed by my refusal. Most wizards are not allowed their own wands until they begin attending school for their wizarding education. When they turn 11, I explained to him, gently, "You still have 2 years to go before you can get one." 2 years. Harry looked anguished, like a starving man being shown a sumptuous feast, but not being allowed to partake of it. "Isn't there some way I could go now? Please." "I do have a solution, perhaps," I said, hesitatingly, and he looked immediately hopeful. "I have a small library of magic books in the basement of my home, over on Magnolia Crescent. It's the house that faces the alley between it and Wisteria Walk. You know the one I mean?" "Yeah," Harry nodded. "So what are you suggesting then?" "Reach into your right pants pocket," I said, pointing toward it. He did, pulling out a key and looking up at me in surprise. "There's a door on the west side of my house that leads down a flight of stairs into the library. That key will let you in. You can come over and read the books as often as you want. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you." And I continued, "If you learn enough about magic in the next year or so, perhaps we can bend the rules a bit and get you a wand for your 10th birthday." "Really?" Harry smiled delightedly, then gave me a shrewd look. "Where did you get this key in my pocket?" I made a hocus-pocus gesture with my hand, grinning at him. He grinned back, then glanced toward the kitchen. "I better get back to dinner before they get upset." I nodded and walked to the front door. "I hope to see you soon, Harry," I said softly, waiting until he walked into the kitchen. I took out my wand and canceled Muffliato on the Dursleys, then went back home, wondering how long it would be before Harry came over to check out my library. It wasn't long. If that first book had sparked an interest in him, the idea that there was a whole library of books waiting for him to read lit a fire under him. Less than a day later, there was a knock on my front door, and I opened it to find Harry standing there. I stepped out onto the front step with him. "That was fast," I commented. "How are your aunt and uncle?" I asked, making small talk before we got into the meat of his purpose here. "They're pretty happy today," Harry said, giving me a rather stern look, almost a glare, really. "The envelope came this morning, like it always does, the first day of the month. I always wondered why they were so happy around the beginning of each month." Science fiction and fantasy. So, Harry had been paying attention when I warned Vernon the day before about what might stop if I didn't get to talk to his nephew. "Do you know what was in the envelope, Harry?" I asked. Had he put things together himself? Or had Vernon or Petunia let him in on it? I wondered. "Money," Harry said. He looked like he was trying not to believe what he was thinking. "I heard what you said yesterday through the door to Uncle Vernon, that what was coming today might not come if you didn't get to talk to me. Well, we talked yesterday, and this morning that envelope came, and they were very happy to see it." Harry folded his arms across his chest. "So why are you paying the money?" he asked flatly. "To take care of you," I replied bluntly. "But they're my aunt and uncle," Harry objected. "They would have taken care of me anyway." "Sure," I said, only a trace of sarcasm in my voice. "They're doing a wonderful job of it now. You only do about 75% of the work around that house. I wonder how much you'd be doing if they weren't getting paid anything to take care of you." Harry didn't respond. He just stood there, looking unhappy at the realization that his relatives were being paid just to treat him the way they did. "So why couldn't you take care of me instead of them?" he finally blurted out. "Then you wouldn't have to pay them anything." I shrugged. "I'm single, for one thing, and don't have a wife to help care for you properly," I said. "Your aunt and uncle were the logical choice to keep you, but they needed just a bit of an incentive. The money they get is that incentive." Why do you pay them then? Harry asked, desperate to make some sense of this. Why do you even care what they do to me? I don't pay them, I countered, avoiding his last question. The money's not coming from me. I just make sure they get it every month. You know what they were going to do when I left the house? Harry asked, bitterness in his voice. They were going to take Dudley shopping today, then for some ice cream. He needs more ice cream like he needs a second stomach. Well, he is their son, I offered, more in sympathy than as a justification for their actions. They probably tend to spoil him. They've done a right job of it, Harry growled. He was beginning to look let down, like coming here had been a bad idea. Maybe I better go, he muttered, suddenly sullen. Do you still want to see the library before you go? I said, wondering if he wanted me to talk him into staying. Harry shrugged, non-committally. I'm pretty proud of it, I continued, trying to build up his interest. I've been working on it for 7 years now. Whatever, he said. I don't care. But he wasn't leaving, so I gestured for him to follow me and walked around to the side of the house. I held out my hand, and he looked at it uncomprehendingly. Do you have the key I gave you the other day? Oh, Harry looked mildly abashed. I left it at home. I didn't think I'd need it if you were here. Not to worry, I said, taking out my wand after quickly checking to see that nobody was watching us. I gestured at the lock on the door, silently casting Alohomora. The door clicked, and I opened it and stepped inside. Harry followed me, and once he was past the door, I gestured once more above his head. The door swung shut and locked with an audible click. We were on a small landing for a flight of stairs leading downward into darkness. I said Lumos, and my wand began to shine brightly. Harry's eyes nearly bugged out of his head as he stared at my wand, glowing white-hot, but with barely any heat coming from it. I smiled and told him, walk this way, Harry, leading him down the stairs. There weren't very many steps, but they were fairly steep. This had been a wine cellar, put in by a previous owner, until I'd found it and decided it would be a great place to keep my books. I reached the bottom step and held my wand high as Harry stepped down behind me, looking around in amazement. My little library, I said, with a flourish of my free hand. Whoa, Harry said, awed. This is incredible. The ceiling arched high above us, over 24 feet in height, with a dozen crystal chandeliers providing light from hundreds of candles. The room seemed enormous, filled with row after row of bookshelves. How can all this fit into your cellar? Well, I chuckled. Magic, of course. There's a spell we can use that makes a space seem larger when you're in it than when you're not. The effect is called Wizard Space. Can you teach me that spell? Harry asked eagerly. You'll learn it in time, I assured him. For now, though, let me show you around a bit. I had arranged the bookshelves in order of increasing experience level, in subgroups by the particular field of magic. Charms, transfiguration, potions, herbology, arithmancy, ancient runes, astronomy, and of course the dark arts and defense against the dark arts. That's a lot of different types of magic, Harry whistled. I just thought it would be, well, he shrugged. Go on, I urged him. What did you think it would be? Well, Harry was groping for the words, embarrassed by his lack of understanding. I just thought you'd, wave your wand and say something like abracadabra, and something magical would happen. Well, you're not altogether wrong, I informed him. For the most part, you study magic so you understand the theory behind the spells you want to cast. Then you either say or think the magic words while gesturing with the wand, and it just happens. That was an oversimplification, but close enough for now. That almost sounds easier than the magic I learned in that book you gave me, Harry remarked, his voice pensive. There's a lot of stuff in there about concentrating on visualizing what I wanted to make happen, and a lot of practicing to get a feel for how the magic would react when did certain things, or how I felt while I was trying to do the magic. I read the book. I nodded. It seemed like the best one for introducing someone to wandless magic without expecting them to already know about magic in general. Harry looked around the room, at the shelves full of books. How many of these have you read, Mr. Monroe? All of them, I said softly. All of them. Harry gulped. There must be thousands of books here. He looked around, his eyes wide, probably trying to imagine how long it would take to read them all. There are, I said, around 10 or 12,000 books here. I knew the exact number, but knowing that wouldn't impress Harry much more than knowing about how many there were. How many do you think you could read in a year? Harry snorted. I haven't even figured out the one you already gave me. That was a special case, I pointed out. That book was the best reference I could find on how a young wizard might learn to build his wandless magical skills. Harry laughed. What? I asked. A young wizard, Harry said. He looked down at himself. I'm a wizard. A wizard. I can hardly believe it, and I've been doing magic for a year now. I'd like to see some of it, I said, folding my arms across my chest. Show me. Like what? Harry asked, suddenly self-conscious. I looked around for a second, thinking, then decided on a book I wanted him to see that was on a nearby shelf. That book! I pointed, and a book flashed red in a bookshelf about 20 feet from us. Bring it here, using magic. Harry had the look of someone being put on the spot on his face, but finally he nodded and began to concentrate on the book. He held out his hand. I knew he was following the techniques in the wandless magic book, visualizing himself reaching out with an invisible magic arm for what he wanted. On the bookshelf, the book began to shudder, then wiggle. It finally slid free, hovering in the air for a moment before slowly floating toward us. Harry was concentrating intently, but he didn't seem to have much difficulty with the book. I hadn't expected him to. He'd moved heavier things in the Dursley house. The book finally settled into his outstretched hand, and he offered it to me. Take a look at it. Harry glanced at the book. It was small, leather-bound, and embossed with runic symbols where a title would normally be. What are these symbols? Harry asked. Are they some kind of language? Very good. I commended him. Yes, they're ancient runes. A lot of very old magic books are written in runes rather than the Latin alphabet. What's it say? It says, The Tales of Beetle the Bard. I read, looking at the symbols on the cover, and especially the one of a bisected circle within a triangle. The symbol of the Deathly Hallows, though now was not the time to mention such things to Harry. It's a book of wizard fairy tales. You mean like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty? Harry asked. Yes, I said. I have books here about all facets of wizarding life. What wizards eat, what they wear, how they live, the things they do for hobbies or for recreation. And, of course, the magical spells they learn. Harry's earlier irritation at me seemed to have evaporated, but he looked upset once again. Why are you doing this? Why are you showing me all of this? He looked around the stacks of books, daunted. It would take me 100 years to read all of these books. It took me a whole year to get through the first book you gave me. He flipped open the Tales of Beetle the Bard, pointing to the runic symbols inside. And I can't even understand this one. He closed the book with a loud snap. Did you ever watch The Wizard of Oz when it was on the telly? I asked him. Harry shrugged. The question seemed irrelevant to him. Yeah, I guess. So, do you remember when Dorothy started to follow the yellow brick road? Where did she begin? Harry shook his head, not getting what I meant. At the beginning, I prompted. She began at the beginning, and she made it all the way to see the wizard. My point, Harry, is that you have to start at the beginning just like she did. Harry nodded, understanding what I was getting at. I pointed off to one side, where there was a kitchen area, complete with countertops and cabinets containing makings for tea and tins of various kinds of biscuits and petit fours. You can help yourself to anything you'd like to eat, and there's a bathroom if you need it. I pointed to a cord hanging next to the stairway we'd come down. I'll be upstairs. If you have any questions or need some help, pull it, and I'll be down shortly. When you want to go home, you can let yourself out the door we came in. Have fun. I turned to go upstairs. Wait, Harry called out, and I stopped looking back at him. Do you mean you're just going to leave me down here without watching me or anything? Yes, I said. Why? Aren't you afraid I'll take something? Harry finally stammered. No, I said complacently. Where would you hide it if you did? In your aunt and uncle's house? What if they, or your cousin Dudley, found it? They might not let you out of the house anymore, and you'd be stuck there all summer with none of this to read or learn from. On the other hand, you can keep coming here all summer, read as much as you want, drink tea, and eat biscuits, and we can discuss any questions you have for the next year. Then we'll see whether you're ready for your own wand or not. You said I couldn't have a wand until I was 11, Harry pointed out. I said you weren't supposed to have one. I corrected him. That doesn't mean it won't happen. I left Harry looking around, trying to decide what to look at first. He spent the rest of the day in my library, leaving when it was almost dusk, well after dinner would have been over. I wondered how much trouble he was going to be in with the Dursleys. But if Harry got in trouble with his aunt and uncle, I never heard about it. I asked him once, sometime after that first visit, how his aunt and uncle were doing. "They're fine, I guess," he replied in a bored tone, and I didn't bother to ask again. He began coming over to the house every few days or so. Sometimes he would stay only for an hour, looking through different books. Other times he would make a day of it, arriving sometime between breakfast and lunch and staying until dinner time. At first, he stayed more with books that were about wizard kind in general, storybooks like the tales of Beetle the Bard and other books that wizard children read, and books about wizards in Britain that I picked up in other countries. As the summer progressed, he began to read more and more books about magical theory itself, about the principles and laws of magic, such as Gamp's Law of Elemental Transfiguration and its 5 exceptions, the Law of Intention, the basic principle of magical focus and its corollaries, the principles of determination and deliberation. Some of that was pretty rough going for him, since he'd jumped ahead to more advanced topics. I didn't discourage him from trying anything, but let him find his own pace and the kinds of books he wanted to read. By the time primary school started up again, Harry was reading a book a week or so and memorizing spells using flashcards I'd drawn up for him. One side of the card had the spell name, for example, Levitation Charm. The other side had the spell word or phrase itself, Wingardium Leviosa. I made up flashcards for the spells in the first 4 grades of the Standard Book of Spells series by Miranda Goshawk. It was a relatively simple matter to enchant a humanoid figure. I used a stuffed doll to show Harry the flashcards and to nod or shake its head, depending on whether he gave the correct response or not. By Christmas, he was able to go through all of the cards with barely a mistake. I began making up flashcards using the next few books in the series. At the rate he was going, Harry could have all 7 grades of standard spells memorized by the time he entered Hogwarts. If things had gotten better with Harry's aunt and uncle, however, they'd grown more tense over time with his cousin Dudley. On some evenings when he didn't come over, the next night he'd remark, "Dudley was making a big deal about me going out again, so they kept me in last night." Harry hunting was still a pastime of Dudley and his gang, both at school and sometimes around the neighborhood in Little Whinging. But Harry had kept up with his bicycle riding and running and could still outrun or hide from them when he needed to. "Have you ever tried any magic on them?" I asked casually when Harry mentioned dodging Dudley's gang on his way over that day. "Thought about it," Harry said bluntly. "Usually, though, at school, it's mostly Dudley threatening to drop me in a dustbin on the way home, but I can stick a twig in his bike lock or let some air out of one of his tires, and he'll forget about me. At home, I just try to stay out of his way." By the time summer started, Dudley had gone on to a new tack. He and his gang began Harry tracking instead of Harry hunting to find out where Harry went during the days when he was over in my library. I thought Harry would appreciate them not wanting to beat him up anymore, but their efforts made it harder than ever for him to come over and read. "Bloody nuisance," he muttered when I asked him one day if they'd been following him again. "Oh, sorry," he added for swearing. Dudley ended up being even more of a nuisance over the summer. In mid-June one afternoon, when Harry was in the library studying, I heard a rustling around the side of the house. I figured, without bothering to check, that Harry had left through the side door and was going home for some reason. I walked out the front door to say goodbye and found Dudley peering through one of my windows. He hadn't noticed me step outside. I usually made very little noise when I moved. I watched him trying to look through the window until he decided to find another one, then froze as he saw me. "Can I help you?" I asked him, giving no indication I knew who he was. A lot of kids in the neighborhood knew me, but Dudley and his gang generally shunned adults. Caught red-handed peeping in someone's window, Dudley fell back on one of his standbys, lying. "I thought I saw someone trying to get into your house, and I was checking to see if they were inside. Nobody in there but us chickens, I said cheerfully. I would have noticed if someone had gotten inside. Dudley turned to leave, thinking he might escape, and I said, "You Vernon Dursley's son, aren't you?" Dudley froze again, probably wondering if I was going to talk to his father. He hesitated, trying to decide whether to lie again, then said, yeah. Thought so. I was going to come over and talk to him. Dudley's eyes widened, expecting the worst. "I've been looking for a boy to mow my lawn this summer," I continued, "and I was going to see if you wanted the job." Dudley didn't say anything for several moments. Finally, he blinked and said, "What?" stupidly. I smirked to myself, pretty sure that he was incapable of understanding a sentence that involved him doing any form of work. "My lawn." I gestured toward the grass surrounding us. "Do you want a job mowing it this summer?" Dudley looked around at the grass. I'm not allowed to use a lawn mower," he said slowly. I could sense this wasn't a lie. Dudley had been forbidden by his mother from using anything more dangerous than a video game, although they were nearly as dangerous, just not in the same way as a mower. "Oh," I said, as if that was perfectly natural. "Does your dad mow the lawn at your house then?" "No, my cousin does it," Dudley answered immediately without thinking. I nodded. "Is that your cousin Harry? Maybe he'd like to mow mine as well, for some extra money." But Dudley must have realized how much he was telling me, even with his short, clipped responses. I gotta go," he said, turning and lumbering back to his bike, laying on the curb in front of my house. Grabbing it, he began waddling as fast as he could, throwing one leg over the seat and getting a running start, an impressive feat for one as massive as he. Dudley disappeared down the alley between Magnolia Crescent and Wisteria Walk. I chuckled as I walked back inside the house to tell Harry how I met his cousin Dudley. Chapter 3. Finally, Diagon Alley. Some weeks later, it was the end of July, and Harry's 10th birthday was coming up. Harry had been spending quite a bit of time the last few weeks in the library. I counted 12 book read since the day I found Dudley peering in one of my windows, nearly 2 books per week. Harry hadn't mentioned anything about a wand in quite some time, but I knew he was really hoping I was going to take him to get one. I had already decided he was quite ready to use one, but there was going to have to be some preparation beforehand. For one thing, when Harry began using a wand, the trace would start to be a problem. The trace was a spell placed on all wizarding children shortly after their birth, as a means of magically locating them. In Britain, the trace was also used to track when magic is performed by or near an underage wizard. Since the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery forbid the use of magic in Muggle-inhabited areas while in the presence of a Muggle, except under certain rather rigidly prescribed circumstances. Harry had been doing a lot of magic in the past couple of years, but since it was wandless magic, it was unfocused enough that it did not activate the trace. It was an interesting catch. 22 of wizardry that the wand, the sine qua non for most of the magic done in the wizarding world, and the most desirable and cherished gift a young wizard could receive, was also the means by which most underage witches and warlocks were caught using magic out of bounds. The wand, chosen to best suit the young wizard, acted as a magical antenna, notifying the relevant ministry department when magic was used near Muggles. I wasn't too concerned about the trace on Harry, though. When the time came, I would deal with it. On July 31st, I once again dressed in my gray suit and made my way down Privet Drive to number 4. I came well prepared, as I intended to have a conversation with both Harry's aunt and uncle as well as Harry himself. Even though Harry had never actually cast a spell using a wand, he'd memorized most of the spells from the first 6 books of the Standard Book of Spells series and had learned quite a bit of magical theory as well. I would need Harry to accompany me to Diagon Alley if we were going to acquire a wand for him. I could simply present him with one. Indeed, I could create the most perfect wand possible for him, but I was determined, as much as possible, to do things the wizarding way, with no use of my other powers. The problem at number 4, Privet Drive, as I saw it, was that Harry was outnumbered there 3-1 by his aunt, uncle, and cousin. Between Vernon berating and belittling him, bullying actions that Dudley had picked up on and emulated, both with Harry and with other children, at school and in the neighborhood, and his aunt's contempt for almost his very existence, as well as her treating him like a menial servant and laborer. I was almost surprised Harry had found any time in the past year to come over to use the library. But he'd pleasantly surprised me. I needed to find a way to even the odds in Harry's favor a bit, and I had an idea which one of the 3 Dursleys I could use to do just that. On my way up the front walk, I did a simple homenum revelio charm on the Dursley house to see how many of them were home. I detected 4 humans. 3 muggles were near the middle of the house, probably in the kitchen, while another person, a wizard, was higher up in the house. That would be Harry, of course, up in his room. It was a Monday, a work day, but I knocked on the door for nearly a minute before Vernon finally answered, his mustache fluttering as he glared at me, breathing rapidly. "Hello again, Mr. Dursley," I said politely, ignoring his rudeness. I thought we might have another little visit about Harry. "Good," Vernon said, stepping back from the door. "Come in. I got a few questions for you as well." He showed me into the front room, gesturing toward a chair where he obviously intended for me to sit. I did so, while Vernon, with Petunia and Dudley following him into the room, sat down across from me on the divan. "Where's Harry?" I asked, wanting him to be there as well. "Never mind that, my lad," Vernon said gruffly. "Where do you get off yelling at my son?" He started off, without preamble. "And what's the idea of spying on us?" I stared at the 3 of them for several moments. Both Vernon and Petunia looked upset, as if they were really concerned about these things happening, but Dudley had a gleam of malice in his eyes. He'd obviously been telling stories about me. I could also sense Harry, listening intently at the locked door of his room. "I don't believe I ever yelled at your son, Mr. Dursley," I said calmly. We had a short conversation about him mowing my lawn. Vernon's eyes narrowed, as if the idea of his son mowing a lawn was preposterous, but Dudley wasn't interested. "As for spying on you, I have no idea what you're talking about." "So you deny talking to the boy about us?" Vernon blustered. His face was beginning to turn red. "You deny that he's been over at your house, which I learned today is not 3 blocks away from here, telling you all about us?" I smiled, looking into Vernon's eyes. "Is that what Dudley told you your nephew was doing?" "Never mind what Dudley said," Vernon shouted, that vein on his forehead beginning to bulge alarmingly. "I want to hear what you say." Harry had denied talking to me, denied that he'd ever been at my house. I could see those facts in Vernon's eyes and in his thoughts. And in fact, I could hear Harry upstairs at that moment, whispering over and over again, like a chant, "Please say no. Please say no. Please, please, please say no."
Can I pet that dog?
I said,
Can I pet that
loudly enough for
dog?
Harry to hear me upstairs.
No,
I haven't had a chance to talk to Harry yet. I wanted to ask if he'd like to mow my lawn this summer, but it's nearly half over now. Upstairs, Harry was sighing with relief, but Vernon was unconvinced. "Dudley has seen Harry's bicycle on your lawn. Do you deny that?"
One, please.
"No," I replied, "but I see a lot of kids' bikes on my lawn, and scooters and other toys as well. I even saw your son's bike there," I added, giving Dudley a look when I caught him snooping around my house. "I was looking for Harry," Dudley said immediately, looking at his father and mother, expecting their complete acceptance that what he was saying was true, which it was in this case, never mind that he was trespassing and invading the privacy of others. "I saw him go in a door on the side of the house." "There's a door on the side of my house." I nodded, "but it only leads down to a small wine cellar that I don't use. The door is locked, so no one can get in. If I find," Vernon began threateningly, waving a beefy finger at me, "that you've enticed a young boy into your home for who knows what kind of unnatural things." I looked affronted. "If you mean something unsavory." "I mean magic," Vernon roared, making both Petunia and Dudley jump. "Things are happening around this house, freakish things, and you're the link back to whoever dropped him on our doorstep all those years ago, if you didn't drop him off there yourself. You and Petunia both saw the letter from Professor Dumbledore. You could have forged that," Vernon snapped. "No, he couldn't," Petunia said, so unexpectedly that for a moment Vernon didn't seem to realize she'd spoken. He was still glaring at me when he suddenly blinked and his necklace head swiveled to look at her in shock. What did you say, Petunia? He whispered, one hand coming up to rub his throbbing temple. Petunia had spoken almost reluctantly. She sighed heavily, looking at her husband unhappily, and said, I've seen Dumbledore's writing before. The letter that came with Harry was from him. Why would you get a letter from him? Vernon croaked incredulously. Because I wanted to go with Lily to the school she was going to attend, Petunia said in a rush, as if she'd been holding that statement in for a very long time and needed to get it out. I wrote him and asked if I could attend the school with her, because I didn't want us to be separated, and because she hesitated but plunged on, because I wanted to learn the things she was going to learn. Vernon had no response to this. Indeed, he looked as shocked and as speechlessness as a man could look and still remain conscious. He looked from me to his wife, his mouth opening and closing, but with nothing coming out. I considered it a distinct improvement. Petunia had looked away, ashamed now that Vernon knew her awful secret. She had once wanted to be magical herself. Between them, Dudley began to look bored, as if he sensed there wasn't going to be any more yelling, either about me or about Harry. I'd like to talk to Harry for a bit, I said quietly. Where is he? In his room, Vernon muttered, not looking at me. Will you go get him, please? Vernon nudged Dudley. Go let him out. Dudley looked at his father incredulously. Go on, Vernon growled, and Dudley lurched to his feet. Vernon's arm shot out and stopped him, then reached back into his vest pocket, producing a key. He handed it to Dudley and waved him on. No one spoke while Dudley was gone. A minute later, Harry padded down the staircase and walked slowly into the front room, looking at his aunt and uncle and not me. He was playing the part of not being happy to see me well. Under the circumstances, I said, standing, I think it would be better if Harry and I had our talk somewhere else. An ice cream parlor, for example. Whatever, Vernon grumbled. Just have him back by dark. Dudley's attention had perked up at the mention of ice cream. I want some ice cream, he said loudly. We should go get some, too. No, Vernon and Petunia said together. Dudley's eyes widened so much. In surprise, I thought they would fall out. It was probably the flattest refusal they'd ever handed him. It was also the opening I'd been hoping for. Dudley can come with us for some. If he likes, I said casually. What? The Dursleys both said, caught completely off guard. What? Dudley squeaked, looking fearful rather than elated. What? Harry sputtered, the loudest of all. Having his muggle cousin tagging along on this trip was obviously not part of what he'd expected. It'll be fine, I said, turning my head so only Harry could see me wink at him. He still gaped at me, as did all of the Dursleys. We'll be back in a little while. It shouldn't be over an hour. I wasn't going to force Dudley to go if he didn't want to, but I suspected he'd come along, for one reason if not another. Vernon looked at me a long moment, then at Harry. Excuse us a moment, he said to me, then motioned for Dudley to come to him. He, Dudley, and Petunia formed a little huddle, speaking so quietly they thought I couldn't hear them. Harry just stared at me, feeling confused and betrayed by what I seemed to be doing to the present I'd promised him. I want you to go with them, Vernon whispered to Dudley. Vernon, Petunia began, but he hushed her. I want you to tell me how they act together, what they say, everything. Vernon hissed at Dudley, who nodded along with Petunia as they both finally understood. They unhuddled and Vernon stood, an unnatural-looking smile on his face. Dudders would like to go with you, he said, through his teeth, keeping his smile carefully plastered across his face, as if it was an effort to keep it there otherwise. It will be good for the boys to get out together. He clapped his hands on Dudley's shoulders. Splendid, I said, smiling. I'll have them back well before dark. Mr. Dursley, no worries. I walked toward the door, Harry following me silently. Dudley didn't move, and after a moment his father said, Have a good time, son, through his teeth, and gave him a push toward the door. Dudley looked back at his father, starting to say something, but Vernon raised his bushy eyebrows and pointed at the door. Dudley sighed and followed us outside. We walked silently up Privet Drive to the first corner before anyone said anything. Dudley was behind us, walking slowly, whether from reluctance, fear, or a simple inability to move any faster. It was hard to tell. "Where are we going?" he finally said. "To get some ice cream," I replied, and turned onto Wisteria Walk, where we continued walking westward. "There's ice cream that way," Dudley said, pointing north. "We're going to a different one." "I like that one," Dudley objected. "It's Harry's choice today," I said, looking at him. Harry returned my look resentfully, saying nothing until I added, "Besides, I have another stop in mind for us afterwards." "Really?" Harry said, brightening at once. "Where?" Dudley asked, wondering what had made Harry so excited. "You'll see," I grinned, turning into the alley between Wisteria Walk and Magnolia Crescent. My house was at the other end, facing it across the street. Halfway up the alley, though, I gestured for both boys to come alongside me. "Before we go, however, I'd like you both to try something with me." Dudley was looking at me suspiciously. "What?" he asked. "We're going to try a walk," I said. "A bit of a silly walk." I held out my arms. "I want you to put your hands on my arms. Hold on tight." They did, and I continued. "On the count of 3, I want you both to turn on your left heel, taking a small step forward with your right foot." "Why?" both Harry and Dudley asked, though Harry already knew. I could feel him trembling with excitement and
Motherfucking
anticipation.
bedrock.
I shrugged for Dudley's benefit, just for something to do before we go for ice cream. "Are you ready?" Both of them nodded, and I counted 1, 2, 3. We stepped, and everything went black. Time gets a bit muddled when you're operating, moving without really moving. In addition, the sensation is not altogether pleasant. It had been likened to being squeezed through a tight rubber tube or having iron bands tightened across your chest. But the feeling lasts only while you're traveling, though the memory of it can linger. It was also a nasty trick to play on Dudley, who had no idea what he was in for, unlike Harry, who'd read about apparition in several books in my library. On the other hand, I didn't expect that Dudley asked for permission from the kids he bullied, so I figured he'd get over it. When light appeared again, we were standing in a dim alleyway, well away from anyone, though the sound of people and vehicles could be heard nearby. Harry inhaled, then exhaled gustily and said, "Wow." Dudley, on my other side, gasped and fell to his hands and knees. Wow, what happened?" He choked out, going into a momentary coughing fit as he sucked in lungfuls of air. "I thought you were feeling better, Dudley," I said, putting a finger momentarily to my lips as Harry opened his mouth. He shut it again quickly, and I went on, "I thought perhaps we should have brought you home when you tripped, but you insisted on coming to have some ice cream." You felt sick just now," I interrupted, just as we were getting close to where we're going, so we stepped into this alley in case you needed to throw up. Dudley looked around at the alley surrounding us, at me, smiling down on him, at Harry, who was smirking at him on the other side of me. He heaved himself to his feet. "We were just in the alley in front of your house," he declared. "Don't you think that's impossible?" I asked. "How could we have gotten all the way from Little Whinging to London in a fraction of a second?" "We're in London," both Harry and Dudley exclaimed, then looked at each other. "Why were you surprised?" Dudley asked Harry. "I'm not surprised," Harry said. "I was saying so, not asking." "Let's go," I said, leading them out of the alley. "We haven't got a lot of time." We walked down the street, which was in fact Charing Cross Road, to a place where a bookstore and a record store stood side by side. "Here we are," I said, pointing. "A bookstore," Dudley said, disappointed. "I thought we were going for ice cream." "Look harder," I said to him. "You too. Harry, concentrate on the space between the shops." Harry began staring as well. "I see it," he said after a few moments. "Wow, that's amazing." What? Dudley kept saying. "I don't." He stopped with a gurgle as the two shops began to move apart, revealing a small, grubby shop between them, with a sign above the door that read, "The Leaky Cauldron." I steered both boys into the pub. It was dark and dingy, with a dozen or so people scattered about the place, drinking from bottles or mugs. Once a few of the regulars saw it was me. However, things brightened up considerably. Hey, it's Jimmy. Jimmy boy, how are ya? How's it going, Jim? I'd cultivated a presence in the leaky cauldron over the past few years, anticipating the day when I'd be walking through the place to the entrance of Diagon Alley along with Harry Potter. If people knew me, they would be more likely to accept that Harry was who I said he was. It was also going to start a chain reaction in the wizarding world once word of his presence here got around. I was waving and shaking hands, greeting people I hadn't seen in some time. It had been a couple of months since my last visit. I ended with shaking Tom, the barman's hand, the bald, toothless proprietor of the leaky cauldron. What have you been up to these days, Jimmy? Tom asked me, grinning toothlessly. Tom, I'd like to introduce you to a very special young man, I said, clapping a hand on Harry's shoulder, startling him slightly. This is Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Bless my soul, Tom exclaimed, looking at Harry with great interest. It certainly is an honor to meet you, Mr. Potter. He reached over the bar, his hand extended, and after a moment Harry reached out and shook it. There was a small eruption of people as everyone within earshot of my comment came over to meet Harry and motioned others to join them. I'm Doris Crockford, Mr. Potter. An older lady introduced herself to Harry. I just can't believe I finally get to meet you. I'm just so proud, Mr. Potter. Just so proud, another older warlock said, beaming at him. We'll never forget what you've done. So delighted to meet you, Mr. Potter. I'm Dedalus Digil. Harry stared at him a moment. I think we met before, he said, looking closely at the little wizard. You bowed to me once in a shop. So I did. Diggle said gleefully. Did you hear that? He said loudly, looking around at the others crowded around. He remembers me. This would probably go on for hours if I let it. So I said, sorry folks, we got some business to attend to in Diagon Alley. I dropped 2 galleons on the bar. Tom, get everyone a round of drinks on me. There were murmurs of pleasure and thanks. The galleons would be good for at least 2 rounds, depending on how generous Tom was with the refreshments. It also hadn't escaped my notice that Dudley was watching everything that was going on, from the people shaking Harry's hand and calling him Mr. Potter, to the thanks and praise they were heaping upon him. He looked rather shaken, however, as if he didn't understand what was going on. I gathered both boys up and led them through the pub to the back, where we went into a small, walled courtyard. What is this? Harry was looking around in disbelief. Is this Diagon Alley? Dudley said nothing. I figured he was still in shock from the apparition. Not yet, I said, taking out my wand and tapping a certain brick in the wall 3 times with the tip. The brick I tapped began to quiver, then wiggle. As we watched, a hole appeared in the wall, growing larger and larger until it formed an archway. Above the archway, a stone sign had formed with the words, Diagon Alley. Written on it, this is Diagon Alley, I said, gesturing both boys inside. On the other side of the archway, a cobbled street led away, turning out of sight a few doors down. Whoa, both Harry and Dudley said. Try to look everywhere at once. Nearby was a cauldron shop, with a dizzying array of cauldrons of all sizes stacked outside it. Harry walked over to a large black cauldron that was at least 5 feet in diameter. This one looks almost big enough for Dudley, he joked. Dudley stopped, looking terrified. I promise I won't tell them anything, he said weakly, looking behind him as if he might try to run back into the pub. They were going to make me tell them. Relax, Dudley, I said mildly. No one's going to hurt you. Then why did you bring me here? Dudley moaned. Aren't you planning to eat me? For trying to get Harry in trouble? Why would we want to eat you? Harry snorted. Other than the fact that you'd make a pretty filling meal? Dutle bitterly. Dad told Mom that you're a freak, that you do freakish stuff like magic like witches. I know that witches eat kids. Harry and I looked at each other and laughed. Those are fairy tales, Dudley, I said, like Hansel and Gretel. They aren't true. Of course you'd say that, Dudley countered, if you were going to lure me into that pot. I casually took out my wand and pointed it at Dudley, who promptly turned end over end into the air, dangling by his ankle. He began screaming, but I flicked my wand once again and his screams went silent. A few people walking by looked at us curiously, but I gave them a long suffering and said, "Boys will be boys." They chuckled, nodded, and moved on. Harry watched all this in utter fascination. I flicked my wand once more, and Dudley turned upright and dropped to the ground, landing on his ample backside. Groaning, he looked up at me as I said, "I don't have to lure you anywhere, Dudley. If I wanted you in the pot, you'd be in there. You're here because I wanted you to see that what your parents are telling you about magic isn't true. Witches and wizards don't eat children. Well, hags do, I admitted, but they aren't allowed to in Britain anymore. Now listen up, Dudley," I said seriously. "If your parents never told you this, Harry is a wizard. His mother, your mum's sister, was a witch. His parents died when he was a baby, and he was sent to live with your parents and you." "I knew his parents died," Dudley muttered, rubbing his bum. "Mum tells him that all the time, that we're doing him a favor by taking care of him." "It's no favor," Harry corrected him tartly. "Your mum and dad are getting paid to take care of me." Dudley digested that bit of information for a moment. "Good," he said nastily. "It's a lot of bother. They should get paid for it." Harry snorted in disgust. He looked at me. "Are you sure we shouldn't eat him?" he asked, and Dudley's eyes grew fearful for a moment before he caught on Harry was kidding. He stuck his tongue out at Harry, who returned the gesture. "Enough, boys," I commanded. "Now here's the deal," I told Dudley, also for Harry's benefit. "We're here to get a present for Harry's birthday," I promised him. And to show there's no hard feelings, I added, "I'm going to get a present for you as well, Dudley, a magical present." I noticed that Harry's mouth fell open, but he closed it without saying anything. He just stood there, looking at me as if I'd lost all my sense. "No kidding," Dudley said, stunned at such news. "What is it?" "You'll see soon enough," I said, then gestured for both of them to follow me. "Come on, let's go get that ice cream first." We walked down to Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, roughly halfway to the end of Diagon Alley, just a few shops before Gringotts Wizarding Bank, and ordered 3 triple-decker ice cream sundaes, with 3 kinds of ice cream for toppings and 5 kinds of nuts. Each one was stacked so impossibly high it had to be held up by magic, probably a series of levitation charms. Dudley's eyes nearly bugged out of his head when Florian Fortescue himself, a stout, jolly man with a red nose, brought them out. But by the time I'd eaten the first layer of my sundae, Dudley had polished off his entire dessert and announced he was ready for another. Amused, I had Fortescue make him another one, while Harry hid behind as an embarrassment at his cousin, barely finishing his own by the time Dudley was scraping the bottom of his second sundae and looking as if he were ready for another. Time was flying by. I dropped 4 galleons onto the table in payment, plus a generous tip, and said, "It's time we went and picked up your present, Harry." Harry jumped up immediately, but I held up a hand. "Before we do that, however, there's a minor detail to take care of." "What is it?" Harry asked impatiently. "Can I have one of these?" Dudley asked, pointing to one of the galleons on the table. "No," I said to Dudley. To Harry, I said, "There's a spell on you that will notify people whenever you do magic with a wand." "You mean my parents?" Dudley asked. "No," I said again to Dudley. "You mean the ministry?" Harry said. It wasn't quite a question. He put quite a lot of facts together over the last year, just from the books and periodicals I had. I would have to start getting the Daily Prophet as well, to keep him abreast of the current wizarding news. "Right," I said, taking out my wand. "I'm going to remove that enchantment, so you'll be able to practice with your wand after you get it." "Can I have a wand?" Dudley asked. "No," I said once more to Dudley. "Stand still, Harry." I looked around, making sure no one was listening, and softly intoned the words, "Abduco et oblitero hanc, magus obsis vestigium dir veneficus." This was the spell that would specifically remove the trace enchantment from Harry. There was a soft green glow around him for a moment. and he shuddered for a second, as if a cold wind had blown over him. I had made sure no one else was listening as I cast the spell. This was considered almost as big a crime in wizarding circles as using the unforgivable curses. However, the only benefit of having the trace was for the ministry, since only they were allowed to keep track of underage wizards. "Is that it?" Harry said, looking down at himself. "Is it gone?" "It's gone," I said. "Let's go get your wand." We walked down to Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. I always smiled when I read that sign, wondering if the abbreviation meant something other than it normally did. The shop itself was rather shabby and not very big. It was long and narrow, much like the thousands of boxes stacked floor to ceiling along the walls. Other than a spindly chair near the door, there was not much else in the place. I looked at Dudley and pointed to the chair, and he sat down. "Good evening," a soft voice said. Both Harry and Dudley jumped. I heard a crack as the chair snapped a leg under Dudley's weight. Ollivander had suddenly appeared out of the gloom at the back of the shop. He was a thin, elderly man, with a shock of flowing white hair and eyes that shone like twin moons, even in the dimness of late afternoon. "I was about to close shop. I'm glad you made it here before I did." He was looking at Harry, a strange expression on his face. "I've been expecting you, Mr. Potter," he said softly, moving slowly toward Harry, who looked back at me but held his ground. "It seems you were a bit early, however, unless time has passed more quickly than I expected. You're supposed to begin wizard school next year, aren't you?" Harry said. "Well, Harry's going through a bit of advanced training," I said smoothly, answering for him. "He's at the point where a wand of his own is necessary to continue." "I see," Ollivander said thoughtfully. The idea of Harry buying a wand a year early didn't appear to bother him very much. "There could be repercussions, you understand." "I've taken care of things with the ministry," I told him. "Well, the less I know about that, the better," Ollivander said, waving off any further comment. "Now then, Mr. Potter," he said to Harry, "let's find a wand for you." He pulled out a tape measure and asked for Harry's wand hand. Harry was right-handed, then left the tape to measure Harry on its own, talking as he perused various stacks of wands. Every Ollivander's wand has a core of a powerful magical substance. We use unicorn hairs, phoenix tail feathers, and dragon heartstrings. No two Ollivander's wands are quite the same, just as no two phoenixes, unicorns, or dragons are quite the same. Of course, he looked back at Harry. "You will never get as good results with another wandmaker's wand." The tape measure was moving around Harry, measuring every part of him, as Ollivander pulled various wands from his stacks, muttering as he went. "I remember your mother coming in here for her first wand. It seems like only yesterday. Willow, 10¼ inches long, swishy, very nice for charms work. Your father's, on the other hand, was mahogany, 11 inches and pliable. Very good for transfiguration. Such memories, such memories." Ollivander sighed, falling silent. I watched Dudley staring in fascination as all this took place. Was he hooked yet? Only time would tell, since I was resisting the temptation to cheat and read his thoughts, though I might use legilimency on him later. The tape measure suddenly crumpled to the floor, and Ollivander handed Harry a wand. "Try this one, Mr. Potter. Beechwood and dragon heartstring. 9 inches, nice and flexible. Just give a wave, and we'll see what happens." Harry took the wand slowly, looking a bit apprehensive, and started to wave it, but Ollivander took it from him almost immediately. "Perhaps this one, maple and phoenix feather. 7 inches. Quite whippy. Try it." Harry tried again to wave it, but once again Ollivander snatched it from his grasp almost immediately. "Tricky," Ollivander mused. "Here's one. Ebony and unicorn hair. 8½ inches, springy. Go on, get a wave." Harry kept trying, but Ollivander would hand him wand after wand, only to snatch them out of his hand after only a moment. The pile of boxes around them kept growing, but nothing unusual was happening except Harry was getting more and more frustrated, and Dudley was starting to look uncomfortable, perhaps because of his belly full of ice cream. "Unusual customer," Ollivander smiled. His great silvery eyes shone with interest and curiosity. Don't worry, Mr. Potter. We'll get you a match here. I wonder. Ollivander returned with one last box. Here it is, an unusual combination. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. He handed it to Harry, who looked surprised when he took it, as if this wand was different from all the others before it. He raised it above his head and brought it swishing down. A stream of red and gold sparks shot out of its tip, lighting up the darkened room with dancing shadows for a moment. I laughed in delight, and Ollivander cheered. Oh, bravo! Very good indeed, yes. And also quite curious. What's curious, sir? Harry asked. Ollivander looked at him steadily, his great eyes still shining even in the near darkness of the shop. It's curious, Mr. Potter, that the phoenix that gave the feather for your wand gave another feather, just one other. The wand made with that feather is the brother of your wand, and it is the very wand that gave you that. He pointed to the scar on Harry's forehead. Harry gulped. I am sorry to say that I sold that wand. Ollivander went on, slowly, remembering. Yes, 13.5 inches, made of you. Another unusual combination. But it is how these things occur. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. I expect we will see great things from you, just as we did from he who must not be named. Terrible things, of course. Terrible things, but great ones nonetheless. Ollivander looked at me. I do not believe I've ever sold you a wand, sir. How would you remember? Harry asked. You've been selling wands since 382 BC. Ollivander smiled. Well, not I, personally, but the previous owners of this shop in its various locations across Britain, in one form or another. His eyes glowed a bit more brightly as he added, I do remember every wand I've ever sold, though. Every single wand, Mr. Potter. That is why I remember the brother of your wand, the one I sold to you-know-who, and the wands I sold to your father and mother. You have her eyes, Ollivander said, staring at Harry, who looked away after a moment, uncomfortably. I'm sorry, Ollivander said softly. Old men tend to babble a bit. Who's you-know-who? Dudley asked. No one answered. After a moment, Ollivander looked at me once more. I've had this peculiar feeling ever since you entered my shop, he told me. Would you mind allowing me to examine your wand? Certainly, I said, handing it to him. Ollivander held it in his hands a moment, letting his fingers brush against it, then swished it in the air a few times. Very interesting, he mused. The wood is 12 inches, and very strong. I'm not certain what the core is, however. It is a single thestral hair, I replied. A thestral hair? Ollivander looked surprised, even upset, by what I'd told him. No wand maker I know of would use such a substance for a wand core. It is considered to be a very bad omen. I made the wand myself, I told him. Ah, so you know wand lore then? So I nodded. Enough to make myself a wand that would choose me. Ollivander was nodding in agreement. His demeanor now showed a new appreciation of my skills. There are few wand makers who can be honest enough with themselves to do so. I am glad that, as you say, your wand does your bidding. The wand chooses the wizard, as I said earlier. It works well enough, I said, putting it away. We should be going so you can close up shop. How much for the wand? What about me? Dudley demanded. I want a wand too. It wouldn't do you any good, I explained patiently. The magic is in the person, not in the wand. I'm sorry, Ollivander said, giving Dudley a pitying look. Are you a squib, young man? Dudley blinked at him, a confused look on his face. A muggle, I said, then added, as Ollivander started in surprise. They're cousins, I nodded toward Harry. I brought him along for a treat. How gracious of you, Ollivander said diplomatically. 7 galleons for Mr. Potter's wand. We left Ollivander's shop, walking rapidly. It was dusk, the sunlight was dying fast, and I wanted to get Harry and Dudley back to Little Whinging sooner than later. Dudley, however, was insisting on making a scene. I want a wand, he whined, pretending to start crying. This was one of his favorite tricks to pull on Vernon and Petunia, who always caved in to Dudley's tantrums. Where's the present you promised me? In my pocket, I said curtly. Where it'll stay if you keep whining like a baby. I'll tell my dad and mom all about this place. Dudley threatened. And so your father will kick Harry out of his house, and he'll have to go live somewhere else. I explained, pointing out the consequences for him. And so the extra money your parents get won't be coming in anymore, and that'll be your fault, and you won't get any extra presents anymore. And so you won't get a chance to come here again, or get any magical presents at all. Is it the way you want things to be? I asked him. Dudley said nothing. We arrived at the entrance to Diagon Alley and stepped through into the courtyard behind the leaky cauldron. On the other hand, I told Dudley, as the archway closed, becoming part of the brick wall surrounding us, you can keep your mouth shut, tell your parents nothing, and get this. I handed him a small, black flat box. Instinctively sensing a present, Dudley took the book, tearing away the ribbon holding it shut, then opened the box. What's this? He said, in a disappointed tone, lifting 2 black leather gloves out of the box. They're shadow gloves, I told him. Put them on. They're too small, Dudley protested. They'll fit, I informed him. They adjust to your hands. Dudley pulled on the gloves, then stared at them, an unsettled expression on his face. They feel weird, he said. They're tingling. I pointed to the only other object in the courtyard, an old dustbin surrounded by a few weeds growing up through cracks in the floor. Go stand by that bin, I said. Harry, stand next to him. Both boys walked over to the trash can. Dudley, I want you to close your eyes. Dudley did so. When I said now, Harry is going to pick up the lid. I want you to reach in and take out something at random. What? Dudley asked. It's just a dustbin. Just do it, I said a bit crossly. Get ready. Harry reached for the lid, watching me, but I shook my head no. Get set. Dudley's hand poised over the lid. Harry watched it, expecting to see Dudley's hand smack into the metal. Now, I said, and Dudley's hand plunged down through the metal lid. Harry gasped in surprise. Shut it, you. Dudley snarled, his eyes still closed. This is gross. Look at your hand, Dudley. Harry whispered. It's through the lid. Dudley opened his eyes, swore, and jerked his hand out, holding an empty cardboard box of Bear Tea Bots every flavor beans. He looked at the box, then checked inside it for any leftover candy. Harry made a face of disgust. It was gross, sticking your hand into a dustbin, but you were going to eat something you pulled out of it, he said to Dudley, revolted. Come to think of it, Dudley said, beginning to look a bit green himself. My stomach isn't feeling so good. He put his hands on his stomach, then squealed in fright and jerked them away as they sank into his abdomen. Then, realizing what he'd just done, he stuck a hand back into himself, feeling around a bit, then pulled out a 10-pence piece, holding it up to examine it. I wonder where that had got off to, he muttered. Harry, if possible, looked even more revolted at seeing this. Dudley looked at me, his eyes bright with excitement. This is the coolest present I've ever gotten, he said. Thank you. Whoa, Harry said, a trace of sarcasm in his voice. That's the first time those words ever left your lips, isn't it? Time's wasting, I said hurriedly. It's nearly dark and little whinging, and I promised I'd have you both home before then. It'll take too long to go back through the leaky cauldron again, so we're leaving from here. I held out an arm for each of them. What if I can't hold on with these gloves? Dudley wanted to know. You'll be able to, I said, as long as you're concentrating on holding my arm rather than passing through it. No sooner had both Harry and Dudley taken my arms and I spun on my heel and sent us on our way back home. We reappeared on Privet Drive south of the Disley house, in an area where the shrubbery was thick enough we couldn't be seen from the nearby houses. Dudley stumbled once again as we appeared, but didn't fall. He turned to look at me and said, "Thanks for the ice cream," then turned to Harry. We'd better get back before Dad and Mum lock us out. Harry will catch up, I told him. I need a word. Dudley nodded and lumbered off toward his house. I turned to Harry. I have one other gift for you, I said, producing a small, black pouch from my jacket pocket. To keep your wand and other stuff in, I said, handing it to him. Thanks, Harry said. Looked a bit small, though. The pouch was only about 8 inches long, not even as long as his wand. "It'll fit," I said. "Give it a try." Harry looked at me, skeptical, but took his wand and pushed the tip into the opening. He watched in surprise as the entire wand, plus his hand, disappeared into the pouch. I urged him to reach in as far as he could, and his face grew incredulous as he inserted most of his arm into the mouth of the bag. "Wizard space?" he asked, and I nodded. "Plus," I said as he pulled his arm free, taking the pouch and pulling the drawstring tight. "When you tie these strings into a knot, only you'll be able to untie it. The strings can't be broken, cut, or burned." I hefted the pouch, then handed it to Harry. "In case Dudley or his parents decide to go snooping in your stuff, keep all your valuables in it." "Thanks," Harry said again. "I better get home before they go mental." He waved and headed for number 4. I operated to my house, appearing on the west side near the door leading to the library, in case anyone was watching. It had been a long day. I sighed and trudged around the corner of the house toward the front door. However, I found someone waiting for me there, a tall, thin, white-haired man with a long, crooked nose and a tall, pointed hat, wearing deep blue robes. "Good evening," he said politely. "I'm Albus Dumbledore. I believe we have some business to discuss." Chapter 4, Tea Time with Albus. That didn't take long. I mused as Professor Dumbledore stood on my doorstep, a calm, yet somber expression on his face. I had been expecting a visit from the Hogwarts headmaster after accompanying Harry to Diagon Alley. His protector and erstwhile mentor had been absent from the young wizard's life for nearly 9 years now. Though I had to admit to myself, I hadn't expected it quite this soon. I hadn't even made it home from Diagon Alley yet. But my guard was already up. I knew full well from past experience in other realities just how good Dumbledore was at getting into your head and discovering your innermost thoughts. Most wizards were open books to Dumbledore, and he didn't hesitate to take advantage of that fact. Not that I thought he was wrong to do so, mind you, at least as far as Harry's welfare was concerned. By and large, Albus Dumbledore was one of the good guys, dead sure. He'd single-handedly organized the Order of the Phoenix in response to Voldemort's first rise to power, and had more or less successfully fought him and his Death Eaters off for 11 years without ministry backing. During this time, however, both the Order and Wizarding Britain at large had taken some significant casualties themselves. Gideon and Fabian Pruitt, Edgar Bones, and Frank and Alice Longbottom were just a few of those who suffered or were killed by Voldemort or Death Eaters. The betrayal and murders of James and Lily Potter would have been a major blow to the Order if it hadn't also resulted in Voldemort's disappearance and supposed death back on Halloween 1981. Only a very few people still suspected that Voldemort was not completely dead, Dumbledore foremost among them. Most of the wizards I had talked to over the past decade believed him gone forever and believed that Harry Potter had been chosen somehow to stop him. A few people who knew of Sybil Trelawney's prophecy about Harry and Voldemort believed he would return. Oddly, Trelawney herself wasn't one of them, since she didn't remember making it. I had talked to her a few times in 3 broomsticks in Hogsmeade, disguised as an itinerant wizard interested in divination. She was quite content to let me buy her glasses of sherry and ramble on about her craft, letting it drop that her great-great-grandmother, Cassandra Trelawney, was a seer like herself. And now, I had whistled up the devil by appearing with Harry Potter in tow. I'd known years ago that the headmaster and I would have to talk, sooner or later, about Harry. I wanted to find out how much my helping Harry get a leg up on magic and overall knowledge of the wizarding world was going to put me at odds with Albus Dumbledore. He was still standing on my doorstep, just as I'd met him, waiting for my reply. "It's very nice to meet you, Professor," I said, extending my hand to him. He took it, smiling, and we shook. I noticed he had a firm grip, as usual, for being something like 109 if I recalled his birth year, 1881, correctly, which I did. "Would you like to come inside, where it's cooler, and chat?" "Yes, thank you," Dumbledore said. I produced my house key and ushering the Hogwarts headmaster inside. My house, number 24, Magnolia Crescent, was similar to the Dursleys on Privet Drive, being constructed around the same time by the same builders. My house was a bit larger, however, being longer front to back. I invited Dumbledore into the living room, offering him a seat in a plush old recliner I liked, while I sat on a divan nearby. "Would you like some tea?" I asked politely, wondering how circumspect he wanted to be before we got down to the nitty-gritty of our business. "It is a bit late," Dumbledore mused, "but yes, some tea would be wonderful. Thank you." I smiled and produced my wand. On the first flick, a wooden table appeared next to us. With the second flick, a tray with tea service for two appeared, complete with a creamer, lemon, and cubes of sugar. There was also a plate of biscuits and petit fours in case Dumbledore wanted a nosh. A final flourish with my wand, and the teapot poured steaming amber liquid into Dumbledore's cup, then into mine. I added cream and sugar to my cup, while Dumbledore added a couple of cubes of sugar to his, then took one of the petit fours, taking a nibble from it and sighing contentedly. "Quite delicious," he murmured, settling back to sip slowly at his tea. "I'm afraid I've developed something of a sweet tooth in past few years." "The petit fours came from Honeydukes," I mentioned. "I was there a week ago or so and picked up a tin. It's hard to keep them on the cupboards. They're so good." Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully. "I was rather surprised," he remarked, choosing to waste no time in getting to his reason for being here, "when I received an owl today telling me that Harry Potter was in the Leaky Cauldron, being introduced around by a gentleman I had never heard of before. It was an intriguing letter, I must say." "I'm sure it was," I agreed, setting down my cup and looking at Dumbledore directly. "Of course, you yourself have not seen nor heard anything about Harry in the past 9 years, ever since you placed him on the Dursleys' doorstep." "That is not completely accurate," Dumbledore corrected. "I have received information on Harry from time to time and the situation at his aunt and uncle's home. It has been somewhat difficult for him, but overall he has had a tolerable stay there." "And so," I asked, deciding to be blunt, "what is the business between you and me you mentioned earlier?" Dumbledore put his cup of tea on the table, then steepled his fingers. "I hope to discover how you learned where Harry was and why you decided to take him to Diagon Alley," he said seriously. "I would also like to know what other dealings you plan to have with him." "I see," I said, gazing levelly at him. "And in what way does this concern you, exactly? You've never talked to Harry. He doesn't even know who you are, even if you know him. I, on the other hand, have lived in this house for nearly a decade. I've seen Harry around in the neighborhood over the years, as with any number of people who live around here. Harry and I just happen to have a bit more in common than we do with the muggles surrounding us." "Are you saying that it's a coincidence that you and Harry live so close to each other?" Dumbledore asked. "That seems quite unlikely. I must say, Little Whinging is not considered a very hospitable place for wizarding folk." "Like Mrs. Fig," I suggested. Dumbledore made no response. "I've noticed her around," I continued. "Her and her cats, the ones that are part Kneazle. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd think she was a squib, or, at the very least, a muggle who has had prior dealings with wizards." "You are quite astute," Dumbledore admitted. "Mrs. Fig is a squib. I asked her to move here shortly after Harry joined the Dursley household, to keep an eye on him until he was ready to attend Hogwarts." "That answers my first question about your acquaintance with Harry. You both simply happen to live near each other, a most interesting coincidence," Dumbledore said. "He and I were maintaining a constant eye contact during this. I had no doubt he was employing legilimency, trying to determine how truthful I was being in all this. So far, it seemed, I'd given him no reason to doubt me, beyond the sheer improbability of a wizard choosing to live in a community like Little Whinging, Surrey. My clemency was holding up quite well. However," Dumbledore continued, "I fail to see why you would want to bring Harry to Diagon Alley, exposing him to potential danger." "What danger are you referring to?" I interrupted, a surprised expression on my face. "Who would want to bring harm to a 10-year-old boy?" Dumbledore was silent for several seconds. "There are some," he said carefully, "even today, almost a decade after Lord Voldemort's apparent death, who might wish Harry harm." "You said apparent death," I pointed out, with regard to Voldemort, and I noted Dumbledore's interest perk up at my unhesitating use of the name. Do you have reason to believe he might not be dead? It would be premature at this time to say that Voldemort is alive, with inadequate evidence to support that claim, Dumbledore replied, managing to be both prevaricating and accurate. But there are those among his followers who may believe that he will somehow return to them, as he claimed to have gone further than anyone toward defeating death. But haven't his followers all renounced him? I pointed out, didn't many of them claim they had been imperieused? And the ones who didn't ended up in Azkaban? There are a few of his followers still in Azkaban, Dumbledore concurred. Bellatrix Lestrange, for one. Bartemius Crouch. Jr. was as well, until his death there some years ago. I noticed you did not mention Sirius Black. I said, keeping my face and thoughts carefully neutral. I wanted to know what Dumbledore thought of the idea that Black was a Death Eater. He is still in Azkaban as well, isn't he? He is, Dumbledore replied. But Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban for the murder of Peter Pettigrew, not for being a Death Eater. He did not have the Dark Mark. Do you think Black murdered Peter Pettigrew, Professor? I asked him. Dumbledore stared into my eyes. I believe he went to confront Pettigrew. For what reason I cannot say. That was equivocation, I knew. I believe Dumbledore knew exactly why Sirius went to find Peter. But I cannot believe he would have killed Peter without good reason, as far as what he believed. Under Veritasrum, we might have found out the truth. However, Dumbledore sighed, perhaps unconsciously. When Ministry Aurors captured him, he did not even bother to deny that he had killed poor Peter. Poor Peter? I thought, and Dumbledore blinked. However, he went on a moment later, we are straying away from the current question, which is why you brought Harry to Diagon Alley. Perhaps you may recall, I said, with some tartness in my voice, that today is Harry's 10th birthday. I brought him and his cousin Dudley to Fortescue's ice cream parlor for a treat.
Cunt.
There are any number of Muggle ice cream emporiums available near Little Whinging, Dumbledore pointed out, his voice deliberately patient. You might have patronized any one of them. Bringing Harry to Diagon Alley suggests you had a specific purpose in doing so. I smiled. I'd let just enough duplicity show in my feelings, enough for Dumbledore not to accept my explanation at face value. I hoped my answer would appeal to his ego enough for him to believe it. True, I did have another reason, Professor. It was simply to see how much attention you were paying to his activities, if any. I'm not certain I understand, Dumbledore said, after several moments. Harry's aunt and uncle found him on their doorstep back on the morning of November 2nd, 1981. I recalled for him. There's a letter with Harry, a letter written by you, to Petunia, describing some of what had happened to Harry's parents and asking her and her husband to care for Harry as if he were their own. I had just moved into my house the previous day, and I was having a morning walk. I went on, being sure Dumbledore and I continued to make eye contact. I wanted him to have every opportunity to determine if I was being truthful. I watched as the Dursleys removed a bundle from their front doorstep. Normally, I would not have bothered to see what was afoot with Muggles, but I noticed that the bundle was moving. A detection spell revealed that, as well as 3 Muggles in the house, 2 adults and a young boy, there was also another boy, a wizard. I deduced he had been in the bundle left on their doorstep. I cast a disillusionment charm on myself and entered the house, where I discovered the child was none other than Harry Potter and that you had left a note with him. I listened to the woman read the note and learned that Harry's parents had been killed by Voldemort, whom, incidentally, your note claimed had left England, not that he was dead, and that magical protection had been put on Harry as long as he was allowed to stay in the Dursley house. But Vernon Dursley wasn't interested in any of that, Professor, I told him flatly. He intended to call the authorities, have the boy taken away to an orphanage, even over his wife's objections. As a wizard of some means, I took it upon myself to find a way for Harry to remain in the house, which was obviously your intention. And how did you do that? Dumbledore inquired. I provided an incentive to the Dursleys in the form of a monthly payment, which they would receive for as long as Harry remained in their home, and which increased each year. Beginning tomorrow, they will receive £950 per month to take care of Harry. That is quite a sum of money for a wizard to provide for each month, Dumbledore said, sounding impressed. It would be, I agreed, if I were the one providing it. As it turns out, however, the firm Dursley works for, through a minor misunderstanding in its human resources department, is making the payments instead. Dumbledore smiled slightly. A most interesting coincidence, he said again, and fortunate for him, indeed, if the situation is as you've explained it. That subtle barb, meant to elicit an emotional response, instead kept me carefully on guard. And so, he went on, not to be distracted, what other places did you and Harry visit in Diagon Alley? We also stopped by Ollivander's, I replied. Dumbledore's eyebrows shot up. Indeed, you must realize, of course, that Harry cannot use a wand outside of school until he turns 17. Indeed, he cannot even legally purchase one, according to wizarding law, until he turns 11. You did not attempt to purchase one for Harry, did you? Or allow him to purchase one himself? I shrugged. Mr. Ollivander would not have sold us one, would he? Dumbledore gave me a curious look. Mr. Ollivander is first and foremost a wand maker. It is a rare gift, and men like him are highly regarded in wizarding communities across the world. If he saw a reason to provide a wizard with a wand, I have no doubt he would not hesitate to do so. So I will ask again, Mr. Monroe, did you or Harry purchase a wand for him at Ollivander's shop? This time I decided to level with the professor. Ollivander sold him a wand, I said. A holly wand with a phoenix feather core. Ollivander told us that its brother was the wand that gave Harry his scar. Was it indeed? Dumbledore looked very interested in this tidbit of news. I could guess why. Whatever happened to Voldemort's wand after his disappearance? I asked. It was never found, Dumbledore said. That seems unusual, wouldn't you agree? I persisted. If Voldemort attacked James and Lily Potter at their home, and his killing curse rebounded upon him due to Lily's protection on Harry, the wand would have been there, unless it was destroyed by the spell's rebounding, and that seems unlikely. So, what could have happened to his wand? Did someone take it from the home afterwards, or was it somehow lost amid the wreckage? We may never know, Dumbledore said. I had come to take this turn of phrase as meaning, I'm not saying what I know. In any event, Dumbledore went on, a tone of authority now in his voice. I hope you impressed upon Harry the importance of being responsible with his wand. He's aware that he's not supposed to use it outside of school or before he turns 11, I said, my voice as serious as his. I kept my thoughts carefully guarded here. No point in giving the headmaster reason to think Harry would violate those restrictions. Dumbledore nodded and set his cup on the table, then stood. Do you have any other trips planned with Harry? He asked, his tone diffident, though I sensed an undercurrent of tension. Dumbledore didn't want me being seen around Wizarding Britain with Harry. That was clear enough, even though he couldn't stop me from living where I was in close proximity to him. I had the feeling that Mrs. Figg would be checking up on both me and Harry often in the coming year. Nothing until next year, after the letter comes from your school, informing him he's been accepted at Hogwarts and the list of things he'll need from Diagon Alley, I replied. You needn't worry about that, Dumbledore said. I will have someone deliver the letter and list personally and escort Harry to Diagon Alley to purchase them. Will you be paying for his books and such then? I asked, not letting on I already knew how that was to be handled. There will be no need, Dumbledore said dismissively. Harry was left a tidy sum of money by his parents. I will have Hagrid bring him to Gringotts to obtain some for his purchases. Hagrid, I repeated. He works at the school, doesn't he? Yes, Dumbledore nodded. He is the caretaker of our grounds and keeper of the keys for Hogwarts. He has been there for many years, and I regard him as utterly reliable in the matter of our students' protection and welfare. I would, in fact, trust him with my life. He stepped toward the door, then turned back to me. You needn't worry about him taking proper care of Harry, he said. I trust you will have no concerns when it comes time for Hagrid to escort Harry to pick up his books and other school items. I believe I won't, I agreed. Dumbledore bowed slightly, and we touched hands briefly. Then he went out the door into the darkness and was suddenly gone, as if he'd never been there. It was nearly a week before I saw Harry again. I was tempted several times during that period to pop over to his house, invisible, and see what was going on, but I resisted the temptation to hover. Harry knew where I was, and short of Dumbledore kidnapping him, which I didn't seriously consider, or Vernon and Petunia locking him in his room, which I did seriously consider, I figured he would be over when he was ready. Until Harry returned, I went about my normal routine, taking some time to renew and improve the enchantments around my house and yard that would let me know when any of Mrs. Fig's cats were around. I also added protection spells for wizards, wondering if perhaps any old members of the order might come around. We hadn't read about any of them until the later books, but that didn't mean they weren't already doing things for Dumbledore now, since he obviously suspected that Voldemort was still alive. I also remembered to start a subscription to the Daily Prophet, setting up a delivery point in my backyard, consisting of a post equipped with an owl perch, a holder for water, and some Annie Perino's owl treats, and a pair of magically animated hands, which would remove the paper and place the nuts in the post owl's payment pouch. At the moment, even though I wasn't hearing from Harry, I expected this year to be the busiest one yet with regard to his training. Harry now had a fairly extensive knowledge of the wizarding world, had memorized most basic spells through the first 6 standard book of spell series, and a wand to begin his practical education. That he had come this far, in 2 years, with no way to actually practice wand-based magic until now, had done much to hone his wandless skills to a much higher level than most wizards ever achieved. I had watched him perform some spells like Alohomora, which I had taught him to use on the library door entrance, rather than use his key wandlessly. In a way, I could regret buying the wand for him, since it would mean the end of his wandless practice, but perhaps I could suggest he continue it for occasions when his wand wasn't handy. When I next saw Harry again, I was just finishing my evening meal a few days after talking to Dumbledore when the bell I'd set up in the library rang, meaning someone had pulled the cord for attention. I went down to the library, expecting to see Harry, and found him there sitting in one of the chairs I'd placed to allow for casual reading. He was leaning forward, his head resting on his hands, looking down at the floor. He didn't move when I came into the library. "You rang," I said in a very deep voice, amusing myself as I thought about an old television show with a character that appeared and said the same line whenever the servant's bell cord was pulled. Harry didn't look up or laugh. His demeanor suggested he was upset or at least unhappy. "How have you been?" I asked in my normal voice. "We had a visit from Professor Dumbledore," Harry replied, after a moment of silence. Oh, I wasn't exactly surprised to hear that, but I wondered what the headmaster might have to say to Vernon, Petunia, or Harry himself. "How was it?" "Pretty bad," Harry said, looking up at me. "I've been grounded the past 3 days." "Who grounded you?" I asked. "Uncle Vernon." "Why did he ground you?" "I want to know." "Because I wouldn't say I wouldn't come over here anymore."